Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the McNamara. The McNamara motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2164, an act relating to natural resources. McNamara moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2164, and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative McNamara, to your motion.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker and members, this is the Omnibus Environment Bill, and unfortunately we were hopeful the Senate would just take our entire bill. They didn't quite do that, so we need to go to conference. Please support the motion.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative McNamara yield for a couple questions?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McNamara, we've passed a number of environmental bills, and I'm trying to just find out which one this is. Is this the game and fish bill with the fee, or is this the environment bill with the wetlands provisions in it and no fee?
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Environment Omnibus Bill. The other bill would be the Game and Fish Bill. The bill that would have any increases in those fees would be not in this bill. This is the Omnibus Policy Bill. It does have some wetland provisions in it.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative McNamara would yield.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McNamara, of the differences in the Environment Bill, and I know the Senate was meeting kind of late into the evening last night on the... Mr. Speaker, I'm having a hard...
Sure, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could, please. Take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that Representative Hansen and McNamara can answer and ask questions. Representative Hansen, you do have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McNamara, I know the Senate was meeting kind of late into the evening last night. What are some of the differences, if we want to refuse to concur, between the House version and the Senate version on the Environment Bill? What are some of the differences, or what are the same things?
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, I don't think they quite have the same wetland provisions we have. And if I remember right, the AIS provision, we had an important provision that Representative Wagenius had asked about, and I supported the importation of minnows. If you remember in committee, we asked the minnow professionals, the fish guys, to work with the DNR on a compromise, and they did find a compromise that we found acceptable in a bipartisan way. Unfortunately, that provision I don't believe is the way we would like it. So that's probably the most important one that I can think of in the differences, Representative Hansen.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative McNamara would yield.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Representative McNamara, I think when this one left the floor here, it had a John Ward provision relating to penalties for increasing penalties for aquatic invasive species. Is that language in the Senate bill, or is there a difference with that?
Member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, that's a provision that historically has not been supported or had as much support in the House. I'm anticipating, I have to acknowledge I have not yet turned my computer on to see the side-by-sides if they are posted, but historically the Senate's been supportive of Representative Ward's position.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. One more question.
Representative McNamara will yield. Representative Hansen.
Representative McNamara, so we have, this is the Environment Bill, which passed after the Game and Fish Bill. And we'll have the Game and Fish Bill, I assume, potentially a motion coming on that today. as well. And then we have the Legacy Conference Committee out there, and we've received back the conference report on the school trust. Is that kind of the status for the environment bills that the major environment bills that we've considered in the House?
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Yes, I think Representative Hansen, you've pretty well hit it. We have 4 school trust, legacy, game and fish, and omnibus environment bill are the 4 that are in the mix right now.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if my caucus was here, I would encourage most of them to refuse to concur and to get a conference committee report. I think it'd be valuable for the conference report to occur, and maybe if I talk longer, they'll be ready to go.
Discussion. Further discussion on the motion to refuse to concur. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the McNamara motion refuse to confer on House File 2164 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Hackbarth motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2171, an act relating to natural resources. Hackbarth moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2171, and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Minoka, Representative Hackbarth, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2171 has a number of differences between the House and the Senate, and I would move that the Speaker would appoint 5, not concur, and appoint 5 members of the conference committee.
Discussion of the Hackbarth motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Hackbarth motion to refuse to concur with House File 2171 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Holberg motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2958, an act relating to finance. Holberg moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2958, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Holberg, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the supplemental budget bill, and we need to go to conference to work out a few issues. I would appreciate your support.
Discussion of the Holberg motion. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Holberg motion to refuse to concur on House File 2958 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Szymanski motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 506, an act relating to courts. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees are Ortman, Limmer, and Metzen. Szymanski moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from McLeod, Representative Szymanski, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is my motion. This is on the conciliation court, raising the limits on conciliation court, and I recommend members vote positive on this one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. Discussion to the Szymanski motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Szymanski motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Erickson motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 946, an act relating to education. The Senate respectfully requests a conference committee be appointed on thereon. The Senate conferees are DeCriff, Olson, and Nino. Erickson moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the innovation bill, and even though it's been around for a year, the Senate has an issue, so I would respectfully request that there be an appointment of 3 conferees so we could sit down with the Senate and resolve this silly issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion to the motion. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the Erickson motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Nornis motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 1573, an act relating to higher education. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. The Senate conferees are Fishbach, Carlson, Miller, Roebling, and Tomasoni. Nornis moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Ottertail, Representative Nornis, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Higher Education Omnibus Bill. There are some minor differences between the bills, and I request we go to conference.
Discussion to the Nornis motion. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the Nornis motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Conference committee reports on House files.
Conference committee report. This is the Abeler motion. Conference committee report on House File 2294, an act relating to state government. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zellers, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees of House File 2294, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. Abeler moves that the report of the Conference Committee in House File 2294 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Calling the member from Anoka, Representative Abeler, to discuss the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I think it's appropriate to discuss the content before we vote on the motion. But and I'm pretty happy to talk about a bill that actually generated Representative Huntley's signature on the way back. That's pretty good. But I also want to announce that I got a picture of my 2-day-old granddaughter here. I just got from my son in Colorado, and I'm pretty happy about that, too. So pictures will be available later if anybody wants to get the snapshot with my picture of my granddaughter. Her name is Brooke, and we're just excited about that. Oh, yeah, thank you. They do grow up, and then they move away, which I don't like. We had a few problems to solve that the last bill left us. We have never made such an adjustment in a human service budget in the history of Minnesota as we did last year. And most of it worked out pretty well. There were a few things we had to resolve. Amongst them, there was a contingent rate cut that we made of 1.67% to the continuing care arena, which we have solved in this bill. We did some closures in corporate foster beds known as group homes that we solved in this bill. There were some challenges with emergency medical assistance in this bill that we've solved at the level of the governor's suggestion, and a few other things I'll talk about. But members and people listening at home, the human service budget and discussion is so complicated people just tune out. But I want to point out there's 3 main areas that we talk about in human services. There's the health care part, there's the disability services continuing care part, and there's the county services part. Last year we did a ton of work in the health care part, a little bit on continuing care, and a significant amount on the county services. This year the focus was almost entirely on the continuing care disability services component. And there's just a lot to like about this bill. Our target was not very large, but we spent every penny as though it was gold, and these days it is. And I think you can be very proud to vote yes on this bill. Many of the concerns expressed by people as the bill left had to do with areas we were able to solve. A pleasant surprise that came since the bill left the floor was the discovery of $35 million in savings from the health plans as they were subjected to a 1% profit cap. This bill spends $10.9 million of that and $7 million in TANF, $2.85 million in TANF, mostly through refinancing and some through actual use of TANF money for their normal purpose. So it's not a very high target, but it serves a lot of the purposes to be about the work of our bill. I'll just go through some of the highlights on the spreadsheet. And one highlight that's just at the top of the list is the Autism Housing and Support Study, which I think is going to give us a chance to serve autism people a little better. These are not in any order. They're just along the order of the spreadsheet. Medicare certification is optional for some nursing homes. We delayed the PCA reductions until June 30th of 2013. That cost $5.9 million in this biennium and $1.6 million in the next one. That is going to blink back on in June 30th of 2013. However, there's a study coming forward to see if there's some way to work with PCs a little bit differently, and I hope that we can handle that then with some changes. The PCA area continues to be an area woefully in need of oversight and management. In the bill is a biennial audit of the HMOs. Representative Gottwald can talk about that later. We paid for that with Healthcare Access Fund. The EMA, I mentioned, is restored to the governor's number for chemotherapy and dialysis. I was really hoping for more of a reform in this. There was a study in there to get some reform out of it. I've been concerned this population doesn't have any primary care, it's only emergency. And I tried really hard to push everybody into the room, and there were too many people in the room. I had too many invitees, and they couldn't come to consensus, so we're settling for adding some money into these two pots of services, which is the governor's recommendation. The long-term care consultation was quite controversial. I liked it because it made people have to talk about how they're going to spend their money before they move into assisted living. Kudos to the long-term care imperative. The abolition of this would have cost $4 million. They came back with a plan that actually saved $900,000 over the terms of the bill, which is a $5 million shift. It's a very good fix. It pushes it upstream to into the hospital discharge process. It exempts hospice referrals and some other ones that make a lot of sense. If you talk to a financial planner, you're all done. But it preserves the benefits and takes care of all the glitches. And it's a really, really good fix. And it's a reform we can be proud of. In nursing homes, we have this consultation required, and we're a nation known for this consultation, and it's really going to make it better for these folks as they come out of, as they look forward into going, or as they anticipate, rather, going into an assisted living facility. One of the other problems I mentioned was this closure of group home beds instantaneously, which, thanks to the department, was held off until now. There are no closures going to happen in this biennium. There'll be a statewide planning process where they can look and see if the people on the waiting list and those in the group homes, how many we need and where they should go. One of the big reforms of the bill is to allow putting people in up into an apartment house up to 25% of the units for these services, which is going to give a real community option. We also give the chance for them to become renters independently. And so this bill does something we've been trying to get done in this area for a decade, giving people who have the capacity, that are developmentally disabled or caddy individuals with mental illness pieces or brain injury folks, the chance to be more independent as possible, based upon the assessments which are now done more frequently. And so if there's one thing to vote yes on, that's a good thing on the bill. And we spent, as I said, $1.6 million, I think, in this biennium, and an additional $100,000 in the next biennium to do that. Another thing to be excited about, Representative Schumacher spent some time on nursing homes and all these these ARM proposals with the foster care issues. There's $1 million in the bill to do nursing home moratoriums. That means we'll be fixing bad furnaces, leaky roofs, bringing them up to code, putting in sprinklers, and Representative Schumacher is available for questions later about that. I mentioned we did the 1.67 rate reduction. That's gone for this biennium. It's not shifted. We paid for it in cash. We had $22.1 million or so in tails. It cost $22.8 in tails to pay for this, and so we shifted the money around. And this was the element that sucked all the air out of all the money out of the bill. And I'm sorry, there's some things we couldn't do. that I really wanted to do, but this was the thing we had to get done this session to save all these facilities, and I expect that the waiver is going to come through that this was backed up by. When it does, this money will drop to the bottom line, and so there'll actually be some future savings to the general fund coming out of this bill because of how we spent the money. And that's actually, I think, just responsible. Representative Pamar, Representative Morrow, others who are interested in the MAEPD. The bill is it's in the bill at the governor's recommendation. The governor, we had a proposal we put in which we thought was the best we could do. The department, as this went forward, came back with a better version, which we accepted. So a person needn't retire at 65, 66, or 67. They can retire when they're 100 if they would like to work that long and get the benefits of MAEPD. And if there's a way that shows our respect for the people with disabilities, it's let them keep working, let them keep their identity in their job, let them keep their little bit of money they've accumulated and not spend it down in a month. It's in the bill, it's permanent, it's paid for, it's now part of Minnesota's law about Medicaid services to people with disabilities. And it was a bipartisan effort all over the map, and people brought it to our attention. We finally solved it. You can be happy and celebrate that. That's really something to be proud of, and I frankly couldn't be happier. EBT has been discussed on this floor since Marty Seifert came into office. I think maybe we're done. Representative Dowd can talk about the details about that, but there's you pretty much can't lie and you can't be fraudulent. But if you need the money, you need the card, it's all yours, and please get the benefits of those cards. But when you have an area that's got some fraud, the people who are using them correctly sometimes get subjected to embarrassment, and this is solved in this bill. Representative Drazkowski put together some discussions about how to get data from public safety about people who are lying on their driver's license. Some people have 8 driver's licenses with different names and their picture on all 8 of them. And some of those people are involved in multiple programs in human services. Nobody minds people who should get the services getting them. But if you're lying and you're being fraudulent, that's not okay. And we agreed on that bipartisan, and the governor agreed. And there's a whole spate of things with that in the bill. If you have questions about that, Representative Drazkowski can yield for those questions. We continued the TEFRA fees that were changed in 2009. That got us $1 million that we could invest in things that we couldn't have otherwise spent. The Huntley bill about general assistance the income disregard is in there for people who are in drug treatment or those places where they have a small amount of money. They can try to go out with something. We do capture all the money for the excess profits of the HMOs, $35.4 million, or $35,040,000, sorry. And they're in the bill. We weren't allowed to spend more than 10.9, although we were willing to. And members, we're still willing to invest the rest in good human service projects. I do want to announce also that the $30 million UCare donation is going to be recaptured at about $15 million worth by the feds, which I object to that. I don't think it should have been done. I think it was a donation. I think it was $2010, and I think they have no business in doing that. I think the department was correct in their judgment that this was a donation. I did not win that argument, and the feds did. And so I believe that part of that 35 is going to be spent on this $15 million. I don't know the final standing on how that's going to be accounted for, but that's what I know about that. Teen Challenge is given the enhanced rate for housing, I think 115 beds in the out years, less in the beginning. They have a very effective program. That includes programs in Hennepin County and the city of Duluth. Wilmer has a ERTS building out there, a state-operated service building. It was scheduled to close on, I think, April 1st, which would not have been any kind of a good joke. His operations are continued until June 30th of 2013. I wish I had about $6 million more to make it permanent. We didn't. That would have been a good place to spend $6 million. That'll be for the next legislature to deal with. But they're carried forward. If you recall, this is an original governor's proposal last year, which we accepted. And then they thought, well, actually, maybe we don't want to close that. And so we found money to keep it open through April Fool's Day. We do pay for the essential community support grants, which are $1 million. The FAME program is continued for a year, $250,000 in TANF. We were able to buy back the child care absent days for the schools. We were told that 2/3 of these programs would close if we couldn't do this. We paid for that with TANF. We're able only to find $200,000 for the Hearth Connection homeless program. We had $700,000 last time, I think it was. We funded the epilepsy program, People Inc. and the Tails to make sure they could stay open. They were at risk of closing. Advocating Change Together got $50,000 for their developing disabled support efforts. A really good program. And one thing I was happy that we thought of at the very end, because the money got so tight, was we have a contingent buyback of 5% rate cut on the low needs corporate care facilities, congregate care facilities. And so if a waiver comes in to pay the state 50% of its share in federal match on the alternative care program, there's enough money to buy back that reduction, which is one of the things we didn't want to do. It came at the end, and so we're buying back half of that contingent. There's a very, very good chance that waiver will come to be, and I'm excited about that. That was the last headache I had to solve, and I was so happy we were able to get at least a contingent fix about that. We could not convince the Senate to handle any White Earth funding, which is a personal disappointment. I tried really hard, and we'll have to find another way. That program needs to go forward, and I hope Noman County and White Earth can continue to work together, and maybe they can find a way to work it out. That was the position of the Senate, that they should continue to work together and spend that property tax money on the people who it's generated for. The study for the radiation facilities is in here. There's a continuing work on coordinating DHS and Department of Health Services. And there's an autism study about Somalis in the bill. For $200,000, the Department of Health was pushed by the House to lead on this matter about how do we handle the crisis of Somali care, of Somalis coming from happily living in Somalia and moving to America, and one child out of 27 finds himself being autistic at birth, which is just a tragedy. And so there's work going forward about that, and I'm eager that will come in to be something. A few of the highlights of the policy provisions, and you can see it's a really good bill, and many of the concerns that the other side of the aisle had, we've actually remedied through this extra $10.9 million that we did not have to spend on the way out. Physician's assistants are going to be covered in medical assistance for psych use, which will help with the medication therapy management, medication management that's so necessary. HMO to Commerce is a study now that's in the works. The Maternal and Child Task Force is reinstated. Gillette gets $300,000 to go for their Merck problems. The Ladder Out of Poverty Task Force is extended. There's a Visible Child Work Group from the Children's Defense Fund. They're very happy about that. And there's a bunch of things from ARM about overnight supervision, the fifth respite bed, are in the bill, and Representative Schumacher can discuss those. And then the last thing is there's a study of record locator service privacy concerns, which was very contentious and became non-controversial. And then the last thing, the commerce provision in the bill, the Senate had 5. There's going to be some work done on the prenatal care that's done by the health plans. And I want to I'll stop there, but I want to thank my staff. We were calling them rock stars, and actually, if you looked at some of the life of the rock stars, that's not quite what you want to call our staff. They actually are just incredible. The Senate has fine staff. We have outstanding, stellar, incredibly good staff, whatever I can think of. So actually, can we just give our staff and the fiscal staff and my CA and the other CAs and staff a round of applause? We are blessed. We would not have got through this time but for these individuals. So maybe we can just stand up and commend our staff. Can we do that? And members, that always embarrasses them. They don't need thanks, they tell me, but I tell you, this is a hard place to work. And so with that, members, I will stand for questions, and then we can move to adopt the bill.
Discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, we just applauded the staff that did a phenomenal job, and I'd also like to I don't think she's here, but Lucy Morgan is the DFL person on Health and Human Services, and she did a great job. I'm going to support this bill. I know there are things in it that some members will not like. but the conference committee worked very closely with the governor's commissioners, Commissioner Rothman from Commerce, Commissioner Ellinger from Health, and Commissioner Jessen from Human Services. And my understanding is they all three support what's in the bill at this time. There's a lot of good things in the bill. The extra money that was we got right at the end, a measly $10 million, went basically the funding in this bill is primarily what the governor wanted, and that includes emergency medical assistance, an out-year fix for the 20% cut to PCAs, which I think we would all strongly support. One of the key ones that Jim mentioned is the MA EPD, which is what the governor wanted. That was his number one priority for funding, and that's in the bill. On the downside, I would say the EBT card. You know, the thing about Health and Human Services, we have EPD and EBT, and they're not the same. But the cards for welfare recipients that they get their cash from in the final bill, they can spend that in the states surrounding Minnesota, but they can't spend it elsewhere. I personally, if somebody on welfare has their mother die in Pennsylvania, I think they ought to be able to use that card in Pennsylvania for those emergencies. However, I think overall, Representative Abeler and worked very closely with the three commissioners and prioritized basically what the three commissioners wanted in terms of funding, and I think it's a good solution, and I would urge members to vote in favor of it.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Abeler, thank you for the hard work that you put into this bill. For many of us, and many of you know here, with constituents that have children with autism, it's an area that many of us have worked hard on over the years. This bill, while it doesn't solve the insurance issue that we have been fighting for many years, it does do a lot. And I'm just going to name a couple of the things that your constituents who have autism or whose children have autism might be interested in. There is a study on the therapies that are needed for young children with autism that we've been working on for years. Actually, there's going to be a study with some outcomes that we can perhaps move forward on in the coming years. There is a study for some new reforms in residential housing that Representative Lomer and I worked on this year. There is some foster care housing changes, a new reform in that area for children and adults with autism. There's a study for many of our constituents who are Somali, who have a very high incidence of autism through the University of Minnesota. And so I am very, very pleased to see we have finally addressed many of those issues, and I want to thank you so very much for your support in that. The other thing, members, that isn't in this bill that I do just want to touch on, because again it affects folks in all your districts, and that is a dental provision that both the House and the Senate actually addressed for our constituents that are severely disabled. And we did have a fix in there to reinstate some codes so that they could get proper dental care, but unfortunately, due to the small fiscal allotment that the House and Senate were given, it was unable to stay in during that conference committee. And it's very disappointing, and we will continue to work on it. I think Representative Abeler is concerned about this and has agreed to work next year to see if we can't reinstate those billing codes for our severely disabled. But again, you've done a really nice job on this bill, and I would urge members' support.
The member from Isanti, Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd really like to thank everybody that was on the HHS committees in the House. Obviously, we had some contentious committees about some of these bills, but I'm very happy with the final product on the welfare reform issues that I carried. The bills that I carried were House File 2080 and House File 2081. One of the most important provisions, I think, is the provision that limits the EBT card use to Minnesota and the immediate four surrounding states. Originally, I felt that benefit should be used in just Minnesota. I feel that the businesses here could use that money being spent in their stores and that economic benefit that comes from those tax dollars. But we came to a compromise with the department, and I think it is reasonable that people in East Grand Forks that might do shopping in Grand Forks can use those cards out of state. The interesting part about this bill and the fiscal note for this bill, when the department prepared the fiscal note, they only looked at people that use the EBT card outside the state for a consecutive more than 3 months consecutively. So those are people that really probably aren't living in the state of Minnesota but are still collecting the benefit. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to stop. The benefits on this card are for people in Minnesota here who need the benefit, and we want to make sure that benefit is preserved for those people. Other provisions of mine that are in the bill, we do have one that says if you had a felony level drug conviction in the prior 10 years that you don't have access to cash on the EBT cards, and that you can only have that benefit paid directly out to vendors. So I also think that's an important one to prevent potential fraud and misuse of those dollars. So I again just want to thank members of those committees and thank you to Chair Abeler for his work in this and keeping these in the bill through the conference committee. They're great reforms. They're great reforms for our welfare system, and I would appreciate your support on those provisions. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although there's good things in this bill, I do have a problem with the HMO audit that we have tried so hard for so long to clarify and get in here. We need to get a handle on where $4 billion of our money, public money, goes and giving for the public programs through the HMOs. And we have all kinds of reports from them every year, but in spite of that, we just can't get at the information, and now I seem to have a personal experience as to why we can't. Those reports are there, they're done year after year, but the verbiage has been manipulated in such a way as to make them weak and not give us what we actually need, and we've done it again. So we have this audit in this bill, but it's gutted on a couple different levels. Instead of having the access to actual encounter data and claims data, we just say, oh, we'll have the auditor look at the quality assurance protocols of how we get that data. No, the auditor needs to be able to get any data that the auditor needs to get at. And we've gutted that. And then also we wanted to make sure it was an independent, third-party audit, not connected with the health plans at all, not working for them, not friends of theirs in any way. Make them totally independent, totally third party, but no, now we have it saying that definition, independent third party, just means, oh, somebody that didn't do the work for them that particular year. So, in my opinion, this has been very much gutted, and it'll be another expensive report that gets us nothing more than we already have. And besides that, then we put it off to 2015, so we don't have to deal with it now. This is 2012. We need this information yesterday, not 3 years from now. So I cannot support this bill on this basis.
The member from Rock, Representative Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I am really excited to vote for this bill today, and I just wanted to talk through a couple of the provisions that we all should be really excited about with where this bill is going. The first thing that we didn't get to see on the House side, but we were able to adopt in the conference committee, is the critical access nursing home provision. That's a $500,000 provision that we were able to get in this year, and really what it does is that it came from this idea of the nursing home pilot project that was in last year's budget. We got some recommendations out from the groups that organized and went throughout the state to figure out what we need to do in nursing home care to provide a better level of service, a better form of care for our elderly residents in the state, and they came up with this pilot project, and part of that was to establish a critical nursing home provision. And what this critical nursing home provision does in the bill, and the $500,000 that we have going to that, is that if a nursing home is established as a critical access nursing home, they get partial rebasing for 60% of their facility, something that the nursing homes have been wanting for quite some time, to get their costs up to the point where they were to get their reimbursements at the cost of their care. So we do partial rebasing for 60% of what they're doing. We also do enhanced payment for leave days. We bring that up to 60% as long as the census is at 90% for that facility. When someone's on a leave day, they get 60% of their reimbursement as long as they're a critical access nursing home. We also establish a waiver in the critical access program that allows for the director of nursing and the facility administrator to share services on different facilities and be able to trade out days so that they can share the employees and the staff and the administrative time in that as well. We also lower the capital improvement threshold. I'll be talking a little bit about the nursing home expenditure moratorium exception and some of the things with that. We lower the threshold for these critical access nursing homes so that they can do more projects with less funding there, so they can move forward with that. We also establish a pay for performance component. And I think that's one of the most important things of the critical access nursing home piece in this bill that we're all really excited to vote for today. Is the pay for performance allows for nursing home facilities that don't have another facility that's in a competitive area geographically. So areas in greater Minnesota that don't have a facility within just a few miles that someone may be able to compete with, now these facilities are going to be competing with each other on a grant basis in the state. And so they have to compete based on geographic and other qualities that make it so that they're continuing to perform better, and we get to see the results from that because of the competitive portion of this. And so I'm really happy and really excited to see this new program that we're able to establish to get more funding and more bang for our buck with our nursing homes in the area with the critical access nursing home provision. We also modified the need for the nursing facility Medicaid certification. Currently, to be certified in the state with Medicaid, you also need to be certified for Medicare. And for some facilities, that's just not reasonable for their request because they don't have the right number or enough people in Medicare to make it cost worthy for all the efforts that they put into it. And so we say, okay, if you don't need that certification because you don't have the patient requirements for the Medicare certification, we remove that requirement to have that certification. So this will help facilities with very low Medicare days. It enhances the quality of care for facilities that don't have this, because currently if a facility doesn't have a great amount of residents on Medicare days, which are usually the rehab types of residents, when they're going through the rehab portion, if they don't have a lot of that, the quality of care in their rehab is going to be less. So if we can take residents who would otherwise be at this facility that doesn't take Medicare days all that often and put them into a facility that does take Medicare more often and has better rehab performances, they'll be able to get healthier faster. And that's what we want to do with this. And overall, this relieves the Medicare requirement for what we're doing there. So modifying the need for the Medicare certification in that is great as well. We were able to keep many things from the House bill that went forward last time. The priority ranking for nursing homes and the IT revolving loan funding is still in there. We're glad to see that. We were also able to get the $1 million for the moratorium exception funding, and that, as testified before, is going to be able to create about 1,600 jobs in the Medicaid in the moratorium exception. We're expecting about $200 million in economic development over time with this when all components are concluded, because we give this shot in the arm, because we give this rate increase for nursing facilities that need to remodel their sprinklers, to bring things up to date, to remodel their facility that's over 40 years old. When they're able to do this, that'll create over $200 million in economic development over the time of this program. $66 million of that goes into the wages. And so for these reasons and many, many more, Mr. Speaker and members, I would advocate for a solid green vote on this bill.
Discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, members, there are a lot of good things in this bill, and some of those have been discussed. And, you know, it is good to know that there are a lot of things that we do agree on bipartisanly, and I think in the Health and Human Service Committees, I think that is true, although usually it seems like the great divide is what we're willing to do to pay for it. But you know, there are a lot of good things in this bill, and I actually wasn't going to get up and speak until I heard Representative Dow talking about his provisions in here. And I just want to say to Representative Dow, I'm really glad to hear him acknowledge that having poor people spend their money, their little bit of money on groceries in the state of Minnesota has economic impact for the state. I think that's something that we should all remember. People who are low income, having a little bit of money and spending it actually is good for our economy and helps our merchants and helps our whole economy in the state of Minnesota. That's a very important point. So I hope we'll continue to remember that, Representative Dowd, as we go forward here. And I also was interested in Representative Dowd's reference to this vendor payment that he mentioned for people who receive our public benefits. And so I took a look at that bill, took a look at the language, and I just want to confirm here what I think, if Representative Dow would yield to a question, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dow will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just wonder if Representative Dow would kind of confirm my understanding of what was done here, because as I actually looked at the language, I think it's probably an okay thing to be doing, but the way he described it maybe sounded a little different. And what I'm understanding here is that under current law, a person who had any kind of a drug offense after July 1st, 1997 would have their utilities and their shelter paid for directly to the vendor. And then I think that what Representative Dowd's changes do is it says that it has to be a person who has a felony level drug offense, not just any drug offense, and that it's just, rather than being anybody who's after 97, it's somebody who has this drug offense, felony drug offense, in the previous 10 years. So that's how I'm understanding the language, and I just wanted to see if Representative Dow would confirm that.
Member, hold on, Representative Dow, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could, please take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, which is filled with all kinds of Johnny bread, so that Representative Liebling can hear the answer from Representative Dowd. The member from Isanti, Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. I can't speak to what was previously in statute, but what this bill does is what you described accurately. For a person who has a felony-level drug conviction in the previous 10 years, it makes sure that they are on vendor pay and that they don't have access to a cash benefit, like from an ATM machine, from their EBT card. There's also some language that was added, and I'd like to thank Legal Aid for bringing that language to us, that says that we will not vendor pay a landlord who basically qualifies as a slumlord under Minnesota statutes until that property is inhabitable again. So another good language there or more good language there to prevent us from spending dollars on properties that are not inhabitable. So, but to answer your question again, yes, it's felony level drug convictions in the prior 10 years moves those people to vendor pay.
Representative Liebling, 1 minute, please. Members, we do have a former member on the House floor today with a contingent of students. If you would please give a warm House welcome back to Representative Jeff Anderson, who served in 2003 and 2004 from Austin, Minnesota. Thank you, Representative Liebling. You do have the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was almost going to ask you to quiet the body, but I think that maybe did it. So, Representative Dowd, well, you kind of answered my question, but I'm going to try again here because I think we're not getting the full understanding of what this does. First of all, what I was concerned about is that you were trying to vendor pay everything, and we we heard in committee that that was a completely unworkable thing to do, but what I think you've actually done here is only vendor pay what's currently vendor paid for certain people, which is their housing and utility costs. So I think that's what you've got here. And I know you said that you can't know what current law is, but it's right here in the bill, Representative Dowd. You see what the change is. And so if you read what it would have been without the change, you see what current law is. So I think that this is, to my side of the aisle, I think this is acceptable language. I think you've actually liberalized this a little bit, made it a little more rational, and limited this only to people who have felony drug convictions, and then only for 10 years instead of what it currently is from 1997. So, and it's not complete vendor pay of everything either, which, as I said, was the testimony in committee was it would have been completely unworkable. So I'm not going to ask you to yield, Representative Dowd, but that's my understanding. If I'm wrong, please stand up and correct me. But members, I think that on the I think that the thing about limiting the EBT card use to border states, as Representative Huntley said, I think that's not a particularly smart policy. But it's not a deal killer for me on this bill. Every omnibus bill has some stuff in it that you don't particularly care for, and this one is, of course, no exception for anybody here. But I think these provisions are okay. I think that Representative Dowd has not done anything here that I would call, extreme or ill-advised or anything like that. So I think that it's okay to vote for it in terms of those provisions, and so I'm planning to vote green.
Member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, well, Representative Liebling, that was about as close as I've heard you come to. I think it amounted to a compliment. And I appreciate the support for the green vote. Members, I just wanted to speak real briefly. One of the parts of this bill that got a lot of attention, and Representative Abeler, I want to thank you for your excellent, careful work on this. I know it wasn't just you, and you'd be the first one to stand up and say it wasn't just you. But I got to tell you, members, so many people got involved in the crafting of this bill on a bipartisan basis. The commissioners, the administration, many advocacy groups who were very concerned after the kind of deep reductions we had to do last year with our $5 billion state deficit. Very challenging, but to come back and do the kind of thoughtful reform and rebuilding that we've done in this bill, I think is a remarkable testament to the leadership of Representative Abeler and the committee. And I want to thank members on both sides of the aisle, both here and in the Senate. I think we ended up putting together a very good conference committee report. But members, one section that I know Representative Lane has some heartburn over it, but the transparency provisions in here under managed care. We set out a few years ago to try to work with the department and administration to try to figure out where are our tax dollars going when they leave our pockets, go through a managed care program, and end up in services delivered to people who need those services. And I am very proud to tell you that on page 14, 15, and 16 of this bill today, you have some outstanding transparency measures that do a great job of identifying very specifically the standards by which we are going to get claims level detailed data audited by third-party independent auditing firms with standards defined in the legislation. We've worked closely with our legislative auditor, Jim Nobles, who helped craft this language. He has a reputation as a pit bull on behalf of the legislature, not on behalf of the administration, not on behalf of the HMOs, on behalf of the state legislature, whose obligation it is to know where the dollars are going and whether the rules are being followed appropriately, both state and federal. And I am very, very proud of the language we've put together that objectively looks at that transparency at a detailed level and will be able to give us a report and an analysis of whether the data coming in is accurate, whether or not the dollars are being shifted around in a way that's appropriate within the rules, and in fact will give the legislature an understanding of whether we need to change the rules. There are also 2 federal investigations going on right now about our Medicaid program and Medicaid payments. Those investigations deserve to go forward. We deserve to hear the results of those investigations and respond accordingly. But members, make no doubt about it. I think you have an opportunity to vote very strongly with great confidence that you have an excellent set of transparency measures in here for our managed care programs. And I want to thank people on both sides of the aisle, and particularly our Legislative Auditor's Office, for helping us craft a really strong transparency provision in this legislation. I too would encourage a green vote.
Discussion. The member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd just like to take this moment to thank Chair Abeler for including the article about the community behavioral health hospital in Wilmer and saving about 40 jobs out in my district. Thank you, Chair Abeler, for doing that.
Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. If the motion prevails, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2294, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Any further discussion? The member from Anoka, Representative Abeler.
Maybe I'm the last one. I don't know. I just wanted to tell people thanks again for coordinating in this area. This is a hard topic, and I've never thought this area should be a partisan area. I thought that the needs of the disabled and the elderly are too important to get down into the challenges that the necessary challenges that we have about partisan nature and disagreements. What this bill does, it took last year's work, found up a few loose ends that were problematic, and addresses them in a way that's agreeable to pretty much everybody. In a way that people at home would go like, that just makes sense to do it that way. Let's look after these folks. Let's treat them like they're important. Let's sustain the programming. Let's make promises we can keep. There's more work to do. I hope we can find a way to deal with some of the other matters we could not include just over funding issues. But there's a lot to like about this bill, members, and I urge your support. Thank you.
Discussion. Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to. Conference Committee on a House file.
Conference Committee report. This is the Anderson P. motion. Conference Committee report on House File 2398, an act relating to agriculture. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2398, report that we agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. Anderson P. moves that the report of the Conference Committee at House File 2398 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by Conference Committee.
Call the member from Anoka, Representative Peterson B., to explain the Conference Committee report. Sorry. Anderson P., I'm sorry. Checking.
We're close, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker and members, this is the conference report on the Ag Policy Committee, which we passed out of here a couple of weeks back. We met last week and in a bipartisan way, which is usually how agriculture provisions work. We came to agreement on the ag policy bill. About a dozen areas where we had some difference of language, and we took the Senate part on 7 or 8 of them, and in the House language on 4 or 5 of them. And I'll just run through some of the differences that we came to agreement on. We did name a state soil. That was some Senate language, but carried on the House side by Representative Szymanski. And it names a soil type called Lester as our state soil. The reason for that this year is that the university is celebrating 100 years of soil science, and there's a very highly successful Smithsonian exhibit coming to the university this fall called the Smithsonian Soils Exhibit. It's going to be here in November, so you may want to put that on your calendars if you're interested in agriculture and soils. And also the 40-year celebration is occurring this year of the Minnesota Association of Professional Soil Scientists. And the Lester type was chosen because it's very representative of both the agricultural and forest soils in Minnesota, and is on about 500,000 acres in our state. We kept the House language for the Dairy Research and Educational Facility, picked up the Senate language on the Rural Finance Authority, and one of those provisions has to do with a minority loan program carried here on the House side by Representative Swedzinski that is a $10,000 loan program that would help some of our smaller farmers get going here in some of the mainly metro areas of the state. A good bill, a good provision for that one. We had a lot of discussion on the biodiesel exemptions and such for Minnesota. We agreed on compromise language at 3 years of an exemption for the logging, mining, and timber interests, also the railroads, and vessels subject to Coast Guard inspection. The Senate had 2 years, we had 8. We got together on a 3-year exemption, and with an added provision of having the Ag Commissioner convene a study group and really get together and look at the facts, look at the studies being done to make sure that biodiesel is a fuel that in the future can be used by all people in the state of Minnesota. So that group's going to be convened by the Commissioner of Agriculture. On the ethanol provision, that was a Senate provision. We had it heard on the House side, but the Senate language prevailed. And it doesn't really have a lot to do with the E10, E20 requirement for how much ethanol is in your gasoline. That's by executive order, going to stay at E10 for now. What it did mainly was focus on the wording or the language in how our statute reads. And right now it says it's going to be ethanol blended with that stock to make our E10 or E15 blend of gasoline. And there is a lot of discussion and talk about including other types of products such as biobutanol, and we continued the language for naming ethanol strictly for another 2 years. And again, there's going to be a study done by the Next Gen Energy Board and language getting together to work on including other types of fuel sources in with our biofuel standards in the state of Minnesota. We kept the Steele County and Wadena County bonding authorities brought to us by Representative Kath and Representative Murdoch for their respective county fair organizations, and also picked up some Senate language dealing with the civil penalties to allow the department to use that type of enforcement. We heard that in the House side, but because of deadline provisions, we had to drop that from our bill, and it was heard fully and vetted in the Senate side and put back into the law, into the statute, I should say. So that is a rough description of the differences in the bill, and we got together. The conference committee was signed by all 10 members. I'd like to thank those members of the House Conference Committee, Representative Hamilton, Representative Keel, Representative Swedzinski, and Representative Eakin was on the committee and did a great job of getting together and getting things agreed to in this ag policy bill. So with that, Mr. Speaker, that's the conference report, and I would urge a green vote by all members. Thank you.
Discussion. The member from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, I just got a copy of the bill here, and I was trying to go through it. And thank you for this. I think this is a pretty good bill, but I had a couple questions about biobutanol facilities versus ethanol facilities. I was contacted by my local ethanol cooperative with just some concerns that they wanted to make sure that the ethanol industry has gone through a fairly tough road recently, that we're not pulling the legs out from underneath the ethanol industry in their recent recovery. And so I just was looking for the provisions related to that, and if there's anything to kind of supplement ethanol usage with biobutanol, we want to make sure that we're taking care of the industry we have here first. So just if you could answer that question, I appreciate it.
The member from Polk, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and Representative. Yeah, we discussed that long and hard, and we have a 2-year continuation of the language that makes ethanol the only source of biofuel to be mixed with gasoline. But the parties, and they all agreed to this, to get together with the Ag Commissioner and discuss other areas, other fuels to be included. But as of right now, the bill calls for a continued 2-year use of ethanol with our blended gasoline.
The member from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, I appreciate that. And I think that is some good compromise language that people can work with. So I guess the other question I have, because we do have a biobutanol facility under construction in Minnesota, do we know when that will be coming online? Just what the timeline is there, because we want to make sure that we're protecting our ethanol industry too, but we also want to make sure that we're not putting those people to work on a construction site for no purpose if there isn't going to be a market. So just looking for some of the timeline guidance. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker. As I understand, construction is taking place, and it's going to be late May or June when they come online. And again, what I was told, their capacity is going to be about 18 million gallons a year, with their initial production going mainly to the solvent or plastics area, which is what they're going to be using that first production for.
The member from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that, Representative Anderson. I appreciate the clarifications.
Discussion. Further discussion to the Conference Committee report. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2398 is amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Anderson yield for a couple questions?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, in the past I've voted against some of the ethanol provisions, and I am a soil scientist, so I'm supportive of the soil designation. But like with any omnibus bill, there's some good things and bad things in here. I think one of the good things is the micro-loan program. I think that's a real creative and innovative program, and I just want to ask a couple questions about that. Representative Anderson, so on page 27, on eligibility, on who can be eligible for this, it talks about who can be eligible. 27.6, a member of a protected group as defined by section 43A. And I have a little trouble seeing you, Representative Anderson. So that, Representative Anderson, does that include women and persons with disabilities, maybe folks that are economically disadvantaged? Do they have opportunity to apply for those microloan programs?
The member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hansen. Yes, they would be eligible to apply.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Anderson yield?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
And Representative Anderson, the money that we're talking about here, that's not any new money. It's a reallocation or a transfer from existing funds that haven't been used. Is that correct?
The member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it's from a fund that was not being used. It's a revolving forest fund program, forestry loan, which was not being utilized.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Anderson, one more question.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Representative Anderson, when I worked at the Agriculture Department now many years ago, we worked with Hmong farmers who were renting land from the University of Minnesota, new immigrants trying to get a start in agriculture, family farmers that were beginning their career. Would they be eligible, folks like that, would they be eligible for the loan program?
The member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. Yes, they would be very much eligible for the program.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I think this is a really good provision in the bill. There's some other provisions that I may not agree with as much, but I think this is really the gem in here that provides some opportunity. And I read in the paper this morning the Homestead Act was 150 years ago this month. That opportunity and creativity, we often hear about freedom here on the House floor, but this is about opportunity and using government as a catalyst to try to provide opportunity, just like 150 years ago with Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War providing opportunity. So I would encourage folks to vote for the bill.
Discussion. Further discussion. I'm sorry, I apologize, Representative Anderson. Member from Wright, Representative Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, there was the establishment of a Dairy Research and Teaching and Consumer Education Authority framework that was set up, and it was brought forward by the dairy industry itself. I'm just wondering how this differs from AURI and how important this is over what AURI does in our state right now. That this, I know that we supposedly there's no state dollars going into this here, but I'm just wanting some background onto the specifics of how important this is versus what AURI can do.
The member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and Representative Anderson. The dairy research idea is designed to be specific to the dairy industry and looking at the size of herd, nutrition, education, those types of things, whereas AURI deals with the entire gamut of agriculture. They do a great job with the innovative type of products and such, trying to get things to market, whereas this would be specific to the dairy industry and work with people, a public-private partnership in working on various things that affect the dairy industry in specific.
Member from Wright, Representative Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, the reason that this has to be in place, that we have to have it set up by the state legislature, that the dairy industry couldn't do it on their own, why does the state have to be involved with setting this up?
The member from Polk will yield. Representative Anderson P.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker and Representative. It was brought to us to kind of take a leadership position, and again, there's no cost to the state. There is a sunset provision. It'll expire in 5 years if no progress is made toward establishing a location, things like that. And to answer your question specifically, maybe they could have gotten together on their own and done something, but this just facilitates the initiative and gets it going, and in my opinion, gets it off to a good start.
The member from Wright, Representative Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson. So this is going to be a private entity, though the framework's been set up by the state. Are there going to be anybody from the state, the Department of Ag, or anybody involved with this as far as their input, and will there be any finances being paid to them to help in this establishment?
The member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Again, thanks, Mr. Speaker. The commission members will not be paid. There may be some staff time by the department to help, again, facilitate some of the meetings and such, but overall, this would be a voluntary organization in terms of not being paid, and there was no fiscal note.
The member from Wright, Representative Anderson B.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just concerned that we set up these organizations or these departments or these little pieces within the legislature, and further on down the road we establish it then as part of a bigger bureaucracy, bigger part of the department, or we take it on and we reclassify it and we come up with some other name for it, and then all of a sudden it becomes a part of state government. And my concern is once the nose of the camel's under the tent, it's there forever. So I'm just trying to be cautious and looking ahead. Thank you.
Discussion to the bill. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. Clerk, will close the roll. Representative Winkler votes aye. There being 111 ayes and 20 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. The title is agreed to. Conference Committee on a House file.
Conference Committee report. This is a Drazkowski conference report. Conference Committee report on House File 1974, an act relating to public employment. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the unsigned conferees for House File 1974, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. Drazkowski moves that the report of the Conference Committee in House File 1974 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Call the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, if you will recall, this bill is one that redefines the terms that can continue after expiration of a government employee contract. Specifically, it limits the ability or removes the ability for increases in the salary or wages or an increase in the dollar amount of employee contribution by insurance benefits after a public sector contract has expired. Members, as you'll recall, we have now actually 5, but there are 2 very significant employee contracts that expired back on June 30th of last year. We're approaching 10 months, I believe, of time as we go forward in which we have unnegotiated increases, unnegotiated autopilot increases, if you will, in the form of wages and insurance contributions from the employer. Members, this particular conference committee, the Senate, we passed this bill out of here without any amendments. The Senate came with a couple of different exceptions or carve-outs. The Senate would not yield to the carve-out that is included in the conference committee report, and that is a carve-out for police, fire, and corrections officers. And members, certainly I, as author of the bill, am opposed to those carve-out. I believe it really undermines the intent of the bill and would find other units throughout state and local units of government that would suggest that why should it be different for those particular bargaining groups. I think they're absolutely right. Unfortunately, this is the version of the bill that we were able to get out of conference committee and hopefully can pass to the governor. I ask for your support on adoption of the conference committee report.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I rise to speak against this. Again, what we're doing is we're treating public employees different than regular employees in the private sector are. We're stipulating to them what they can and cannot negotiate in collective bargaining, and this is wrong. I mean, the carve-outs for the police and fire, we should be carving out all of our public employees. This is going right after and attacking collective bargaining and collective bargaining of our state employees, and I think this is a bad bill. It was a bad bill coming off the floor. It got a little bit better coming back from conference, but it's still a bad bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too rise urging a no vote on adoption of the conference committee report, and if adopted, a rejection of the bill. It's based on a false premise, and you heard it from the chief author. He said that public employees are getting unnegotiated raises. That's false. They're getting what was negotiated between their collective bargaining agent and their employer in the past. Nothing more, and it should be nothing less. A deal was made, a promise committed. That deal, that promise, those employees, whether they're protecting our safety as police officers or protecting our health in the public health department or protecting our waters in DNR or protecting the educational opportunities of our children in higher education or K-12, those promises, those workers, our communities should be respected and honored. Vote no on the adoption of the conference committee report.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Well, thank you, members. I think we all know how we're going to vote on this, but I think there's one wrinkle of the conversation that bears repeating, basically, that we talked about in committee. This bill really puts the thumb on the scale in favor of management in this way. What we heard in committee was that there were a couple of arbitration decisions by arbitrators that went the way of workers instead of going the way of, say, a city or a school district or some other public entity. And the reason it went the way of the workers is the management side failed to negotiate, or negotiate effectively enough, a provision that allowed for certain contract terms to stop if there was no contract. So instead of being better negotiators, instead of a school district or a city or any other entity being a better, more clever, craftier, more effective negotiator, they've come running to the legislature to fix their problem. I think, just as we often say in here, we want free markets and we don't want the legislature intervening where private parties have a private agreement, I think the same holds true here. Let people who are negotiating a labor contract, let the unions and yet let public entities, whether it's a city or a county or the state, let them duke it out in a negotiating room, and whoever negotiates the best deal, we should be fine with that. But what's happened here is that there are parties who came seeking this legislation who were mad that they got vested in the negotiations. And that's not any of our fault. It's their fault. If they wanted to negotiate a provision in a contract that says after X date, these certain employment conditions no longer exist, whether it's a wage or a benefit or something else, that's fine. They should have done that. They should have held out. And if I were on a school board or if I were on a city council, I would do that too. I would have a duty to my city or to the school to negotiate a hard deal and a firm deal. But apparently in a couple of cases they didn't do that. And they got mad because an arbitrator ruled against them, and now they're coming to the legislature to fix it, and I don't think we should fix it for them. I think the answer is that two sides should negotiate vigorously, and whoever can get the best deal should try to get the best deal. But I really hope we don't see more bills like this where someone's coming to the legislature asking us to fix a problem that they could have solved themselves.
The member from Itasca, Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I've had an occasion to be a party to negotiations, collective bargaining negotiations in both the public and the private sectors. And I can tell you without question that the process works best when there's mutual respect, mutual understanding, dignity, fairness, and a level playing field in the collective bargaining process. And I can tell you that, you know, in your motivation, in your interest in ostensibly tilting toward management by making it harder and harder and harder for workers to be treated justly, there are some outcomes here, Representative Drazkowski, that I don't think you're going to like. You're going to see communities torn apart, especially small rural communities where everybody knows everybody. You're going to see more strikes. You're going to see more hard feelings that, it's been my experience in both the public and the private sector, take years to heal. Why would we do that? Why would we tear communities apart? Why would we make it more likely that management will force workers to withhold services? Why would we create an environment where replacement workers are more of a reality than is today? And lastly, think of your small rural communities and think of the grocery store owner, the hardware store owner, the people who sell services and goods, and ask yourself, is it good policy to have residents of my community have less income or more income with which to purchase goods and services from local businesses? I think if you think about it, you'll conclude when working class families have resources, they spend those resources. And everybody in the community benefits. Members, this is punitive, this is unnecessary. This disrupts labor management cooperation and creates disharmony. It's a bad bill. Please find it within yourselves to vote no.
Member from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield for one question, please?
He will yield, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Drazkowski, line 127, 128 of the bill indicates that a wage or salary increase would not be paid, and I'll just focus on the last three words, performance or merit. Would that include a promotion, Representative Drazkowski?
The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that if it was a promotion, Representative Banyan, that happened in the previous biennium's contract, and it was anticipated that the new biennium was going to automatically receive an additional parallel promotion, then yes. Otherwise, if it's a promotion that's outside of that contract, I don't believe that it would apply.
The member from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Representative Drazkowski. I appreciate that clarification because it's helpful to me. I voted against this bill when it was up the first time, and the reason for that was based on a couple of letters I received from faculty, one of whom I helped hire to campus. I'll tell you something. When you hire a person to campus, and I don't know where Representative Morrow is, but he's a department chair, and like me, you know, when you hire someone, your hope is that they advance, they get tenure, and they get promoted. And at St. Cloud State, there's very few chances for you to get a promotion. You just move along in your step along the way. But one of the places where you actually get an extra bump is when you get your promotion. It automatically happens. And I had a faculty member just write to me last week, and this was a fellow that I helped hire to campus, who said, King, Am I going to get my raise? I just finally got my promotion. And this person has been waiting 6 years. 6 years, because typically we don't promote people until 5 or 6 years. And they get promoted along the way during contracts that have already been signed, Representative Drazkowski. Unfortunately, for members of the smaller unions, of which I'm a member of one, I'm a member of the interfaculty organization that covers MNSCU faculty, 4-year faculty, we have to wait for our contracts to get settled until the bigger ones get settled, because our health benefits depend on having a common plan across all of the state employees. And the problem for that is that we don't necessarily have a whole lot of control over when we get to settle. We have to kind of wait our turn. So we've been working without a contract now for about 9 months. We're still discussing what's going on. There was a press conference this morning discussing negotiations with one of our larger unions, and we're still waiting. And this person, meanwhile, has worked 6 years, has earned a promotion, according to our department, according to our dean, I believe according to our provost. I don't know if it's been signed yet by the president, but I expect it will. And even if all of us sign that, this person's 6 years of work will not be recognized by about a less than 5% increase in his pay unless other people decide to settle their contracts first before us. I'm sorry, Representative Drazkowski. I appreciate what you're doing with the bill, but I just cannot support it.
Discussion. The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, thank you for the discussion on the bill. Members, the reality is that this is not the thumb on the scale of the employer. This is, in this case, this is a situation where the unions have the advantage in the negotiations. Now, it was discussed that there's expectations that if it was included in the last biennium's contract, well, it's already been negotiated. Why are you doing this? There is not looking forward during that contract negotiation process, expecting that we are going to get into the situation we're in, which is really unprecedented in our history, members. Representative Lilly was chair of the subcommittee on employee relations last biennium, and I was a member of that committee. And I don't remember, as we discussed those contracts, I don't remember one time when there was anticipation about what are these steps and lanes going to do after contract expiration as we look at next year and these contracts going forward. There was not that type of discussion. As a matter of fact, members, what it comes down to is the fact is that in our public employee contracts, we have both this automatic reauthorization of the contract terms going forward, coupled with the step and lane increases and the COLAs and the insurance liability increases on the employer of the old contract. And as a matter of fact, I will submit to you that if the old contract had salary reductions or health insurance reductions in it, it would be the unions coming to us to ask for this provision, to put the employer in the employee groups on the same level playing field that we see in the private sector. Members, the current situation where we've gone to nearly 10 months now of unnegotiated autopilot increases for 50-some thousand state employees is projected over the biennium to cost the taxpayers of Minnesota unrepresented and unnegotiated cost increases of $140 million. Now, this takes place over and again at the local units of government. It happens in the cities, in the counties, in the school districts. As a matter of fact, the School Boards Association overwhelmingly supports this, as do the League of Minnesota Cities, as do many of the county groups, for the very same reason. They want to see an end of contract situation that places the employer and the employee on the same footing, on the same ground, so that they can get into negotiating the contract and get one negotiated quickly, which is in the best interest of both groups. I'd appreciate your support for the adoption of the report.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Drazkowski hit on a couple of things that I wanted to, but to Representative Banyan's point, I think what members need to realize is that we aren't shutting down pay and all the normal components of a person's life as an employee. We're not shutting down promotions, those kinds of things, but basically it just says that if you haven't agreed to a new contract, the previous contract's provisions for those previous years will remain in effect. So if there's a bump in pay for a promotion and you get promoted, you still get that, but it's under the old contract's terms, not the subsequent years. And I think all of us know what's happened both here at the state and in local governments is that it's always very tempting to negotiate a future fiscal year or a future biennium's contract terms to be a little richer than the current ones. It's human nature, right? We all want something. We can't afford it this year, so we'll put a promise for next year or the next time. And there just isn't the level of scrutiny that's applied to those future contracts. And so I urge members to think about what we will now look at in the Employment Relations Commission's report to the legislature if we get one here. And you know what it's going to show? It's going to show the next biennium's increases. It won't show the biennium after that or the biennium after that. And so what we all agree to, what we all sign up for, what we all understand is the next contract, not the downstream years, just the next one. And so all of the richer features are built into those out years, knowing that there's not going to be the level of scrutiny, and then in the end we'll be negotiating against those richer out years when we get down to final negotiations. So members, this is just, in my mind, a plain old common sense thing. It says when we're starting to negotiate the next contract, in essence the starting point should be the contract that we had the last period as compared to some richer future contract in an upcoming period. And it really does level the playing field. I couldn't disagree more that it tends to give the management side of this an upper hand. In fact, it's just the reverse. It really does level the playing field, and I don't think it's unfair at all.
The gentleman from Itasca, Representative Ansels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the negotiated steps and lanes concept in Minnesota public employment is not something new to public labor law in Minnesota. In the days before PELRA, the Public Employee Labor Relations Act, Minnesota's public employees negotiated with public sector management under something called meet and confer. And even then, steps and lanes were part of the relationship between labor and management in Minnesota. So members, the Drazkowski bill would clearly eliminate the concept of steps and lanes, something that we've had in Minnesota since the early 1960s. This is a radical departure from the manner in which public employees at our colleges and universities, public employees in state government, public employees in our public schools relate to and bargain with management. This is really a radical idea. And this is not the time to be promoting radical ideas which take money out of the pocketbooks of working class families. Once again, I urge you, listen to what Representative Banyan had to say, members. He made good sense. Please vote no.
Discussion. Gentleman from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Ansels, this does not end steps and lanes. What it says, if you read the bill, Representative, is it says that automatic step and lane increases obtained from the previous and expired contract will not automatically be applied in an unnegotiated environment going forward. You and I know that the next negotiated contract is going to carry over the same steps and lanes that they have in the past contract. So let's take a closer look at that bill, that language. But members, appreciate your indulgence, and I would appreciate your adoption of the report.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference report on House File 1974 say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill's third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 1974 as amended by conference.
Third reading. Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll on the conference report. Sounds good. All right. Clerk will close the roll. There being 68 ayes and 63 nays, the bill is repassed. The conference committee report is repassed, and its title agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announced the appointment of following members of the House to a conference committee on House File or Senate File 506: Shemansky, Mazerol, and Cav. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announced the appointment of following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 946: Erickson, Biskins, and Greiling. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announced the appointment of following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 1573: Nornis, Banyan, Dettmer, Vogel, and Mariani. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 2164. McNamara, Anderson P., Hackbarth, Torkelson, and Dill. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 2958. Holberg, McElpatrick, and Eakin.
Fiscal calendar pursuant to Rule 1.22 Holberg for the Committee on Ways and Means calls up for immediate consideration House File 418. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 418 on the fiscal calendar for today. The second engrossment, an act relating to state government.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey, to your bill. Whoops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill that requires the Department of Administration to take a look at all of the back office functions, the accounting, the payroll, the human resources, the procurement, all of those types of things across all 72 agencies and attached boards, and look for opportunities to get more efficient there. Members, these are the functions of government that frankly aren't adding value. They aren't essential to the program functions. They're just the day-to-day work that has to be done. And for those of you who were around 2 years ago, you'll remember that we spent about $80 million for a new accounting system across all of those agencies. And now that that system has been implemented and everybody's using a common platform, the same screens, the same tools, the same data elements, all of that, we have a huge opportunity to make those back office functions more efficient. And so just like we did with the Office of Enterprise Technology 3 years ago under Representative Kahn, then Chair Kahn, we commissioned a study to do the same kind of look at all of our IT operations, and the outcome of that was that we were able to do the consolidation work that's going on now from an IT standpoint. And so this is the starting point of that same activity. There's a very well-established set of groups. In fact, the National Association of State Budget Officers has a master contract nationally for organizations to come in, do this kind of analysis, benchmark the state of Minnesota against other high-performing states and organizations, and identify where the improvement opportunities are. So this bill commissions or asks the Commissioner of Admin to do that. I know they're receptive to this. We talked about it at our One Minnesota conference. The anticipation is that this study, which is not an expensive one, would be funded from existing appropriations or from the savings generated by the study. We have another 15 months left in this, 12 or 14 months in this biennium. Certainly there's hope that we'd find enough opportunities to pay for the study. And so that's the mechanism of the bill, members. I do have an amendment coming up, but put the bill before you now.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
And others moving to amend House File 418, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A2.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the A2 amendment allows the legislature to participate in this same study. Many of us have talked about, as we ask the executive branch agencies to go through these kind of efficiency and optimization activities, we've talked about having the legislature do the same. Kind of apply the same standard of rigor to ourselves. And Representative Stensrud had a bill earlier in the year that prescribed some of that. As compared to enacting his entire bill, what we're doing here is saying that the Legislative Coordinating Commission can ask to be part of this study, and then when the study is commenced, it will actually apply the same kind of analysis to the back office functions of the legislature. So it's a permissive thing. The LCC can do it. We're not mandating that they would. I do think that Mr. Hubinger is receptive to this, and I would defer to Representative Stensrud if he's got some additional comments. But I think this is a good way for us as a legislature to say we're going to participate in this same kind of activity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Stensrud, to the Downey amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment, this will give both the House and the Senate to learn what gains we might have in the efficiencies in the back office. I just, thank Representative Downey for this bill. I had some other legislation that didn't meet deadlines that looked at a lot of the different things in areas for improvement between the House and the Senate. You look at all of the things we've been doing for years and years, and oftentimes we don't take the time to actually look at what we have going on in our own bodies. So I think we should shine the light on our own back office. I mean, do we really think that we have no room for improvement? I think this is a great opportunity to use the same evaluation that we're asking our government agencies to do and take advantage of this opportunity to find some efficiencies within the House and the Senate, and I urge your green vote.
Discussion to the A2 amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Stensrud yield for a question?
The gentleman from Hennepin will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Stensrud, I'm looking at the amendment and on lines 1.7, 1.8, the incremental cost of the benchmarking study implemented at the request must be paid for by the Commission. Do we have any estimates? You'd mentioned you had a bill that had been introduced. Is there a fiscal note, or do we have an estimate of the cost of that study?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Stensrud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is different than from the legislation I was proposing, and I would defer to Representative Downey on the cost issue.
The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Downey yield?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Dakota. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a great question. The kind of standard cost for this, from what I was told, when we go through the national contract of the National Association of State Budget Officers, is about $200,000. This is a benchmarking study that they have performed around the country for a number of states. They're highly efficient in doing it. And so if we added the LCC and have them also look at the legislature, I'm guessing that the size of the legislative operation compared to the rest of the state is going to be a very small fraction of that. So I think we'd be talking probably thousands, at most tens of thousands of dollars. And the LCC, again, is not required to do this in this amendment. It's an option available to them. So it basically says we could include the legislature in this study if they wanted to and they felt the cost was worth it.
Gentleman from Dakota.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Downey yield for another question.
He will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Representative Downey, is this the bill that this amendment would be attached to? Is it having an implementation date of after enactment, or is it in the next fiscal year? I don't know. I don't have the bill in front of me. I'm just looking at when would this cost be incurred, and would it be this fiscal year, next year, or during the next biennium?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You are right. The bill has an enactment date immediately. It does require a report from the Commissioner of Administration by January 15th of 2013. So somewhere between today and January 15th, a year from now, the study would need to be completed and the costs incurred by the legislature as well.
The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and maybe there's someone else that could answer that question. And looking at the precedent of doing something like this with unanticipated costs, so I'll open that up and see if someone else can help.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Representative Hansen, for bringing up the question of the cost. That's the whole problem with this underlying bill. Representative Downey talks about $200,000 that this will cost, but he has no money for it. None. Zero. And then we add to this additional responsibilities with the same amount of money. None. The Senate has appropriated $450,000 for this study, probably a reasonable amount to pay for it. But in this bill, members, if you will look at the underlying bill, it says on line 1.10, the Department of Administration must use general funds previously appropriated to the Commissioner for this study. Well, that says that the budget that you passed last year either had $200,000 extra in it, or, and we didn't know about that, or that we are taking $200,000 from the Department of Administration that is used for something else, and we're not telling Minnesotans what they are going to lose because we're taking away this $200,000, or maybe $450,000. Whether or not this study is good or not, I'm not going to comment on. It's probably good. That may be fine. But the funding does not work because it is not here. It is zero. And members, for that reason, I think you should vote against the amendment, but for sure, vote against the bill.
Discussion to the A2 amendment. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, members, and Representative Downey, if you could yield to a question. In the Ways and Means Committee, you indicated that the cost would be a few $100,000, and now you're using the number $200,000 plus what the legislative share would be. And the Senate, I just found out, has actually, instead of reallocating money internally, given a new appropriation of $450,000. So this is the problem when we don't have a good solid fiscal note before us. Between the amendment that's before us and the bill that will be voted on in a few minutes, we seem to have a range from $200,000 to $450,000 to a general comment of a few $100,000, plus whatever the LCC would put in for the legislature. So, Representative Downey, where are you getting your numbers from when you talk about these numbers, and when you say that the LCC is willing to do this, have they done a fiscal analysis of what the legislative cost would be? So there's two questions there. What's the overall solid number when we vote on the final bill, but what's the number that we should be talking about when we're voting on the amendment?
The gentleman from Hennepin will yield to the gentleman from Hennepin. The gentleman from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, I'll answer, I think, what was your second question first, because that's the easiest one. The amendment that we're actually about to vote on only allows the Legislative Coordinating Commission to do so upon the request of the chair and the vice chair, and so this is, again, permissive. It's not anything that they would have to do. It just says if there is the interest that we think there is in the legislature to do some of these same things, they can piggyback on this study, not have to create the wheel and go through contracting and all of that. They can just be, quote-unquote, another entity on the side of this study. So in terms of the cost to the LCC in its decision-making, they can make that analysis. If it's worth it and they want to join in, great. If not, they don't have to. But this does say that, given the separation of powers, we're actually instructing the Commissioner of Administration to say if the legislature wants in on this study, he should let them in. So that's the answer to the first question. That would be a cost-benefit decision of the LCC. In terms of the broader costs of the project, at our One Minnesota conference, we had this very discussion in a breakout with a group of legislators, and at the time, I'm remembering a $200,000 number, which was if we leveraged the National Association of State Budget Officers master national contract with this organization. I believe the Senate may have heard a number closer to $400,000, and so they made their appropriation in their bill. And when we talked about it in Ways and Means, I was probably just splitting the difference and saying a few $100,000 to give an approximation of what the cost was. But members, this raises, I think, a really important point, and one that we need to think about as we go through these kinds of improvement opportunities and actually finding a way to capture those savings. And Representative Wagenius, you mentioned that the bill says it should be from existing appropriations, but down below in the bill in line 2.16 through 2.18, it actually says that that current appropriation would be covered by the savings generated from the study and or the savings that we have already started to generate and realize from the OET consolidation. And the reports that I have heard is that we already, just from some very small incremental contracting efficiencies in OET, have saved $600,000. Now, I know our Chief Information Officer does not want us raiding, if you will, that pot of savings, but it really does beg a bigger question, members, and that is, as we realize savings from efficiencies in these agencies, we need to find a way to capture that, redeploy it for new initiatives, new opportunities to find additional savings and additional efficiencies. So I'm really challenging us to think that every time we do one of these things, we don't have to have a new appropriation. If these things work and we do them right, they should easily pay for themselves, and many of the vendors will do them on a pay-for-performance basis. So I think we've got the appropriate funding mechanisms in here. I'd like to approve this bill and get it to conference, and we'll work with the Commissioner of Administration, the Senate, and we'll come to an agreement on this, and I think have the right solution that everybody can live with.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, members, I guess I asked a couple of questions. I got a speech instead, but at any rate, you know, the purpose of the Ways and Means Committee, and that's one of the reasons that some of us struggled with this, is that we're supposed to have hard and fast numbers. And we were just given an informal range of a few $100,000. The Senate seems to have a real number, $450,000, and they're putting new money in. But we don't know. You know, we do have representation from our side of the aisle in the LCC, but most of us don't have any voice in the LCC these days. Only a limited number. And when we have the fiscal problems that are facing the state, and we're dealing with such loose numbers of from 200,000, as I said earlier, to 450,000, plus the legislative costs, if they choose to participate, pretty soon we're talking about some real money here that's not really accounted for, and that's my point. Members, I would urge a no vote on the amendment, and then a no vote on the bill for the very reasons that Representative Wagenius gave earlier. And admin basically says this does not work. They're the ones that are supposed to administer this when you're talking about back office savings and reappropriating money. So it's just a poor direction to go the way this is currently structured. So I again urge a no vote on the amendment and on the bill.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Downey, you said that well, we're going to have some savings from this. And that may be true, but still your funding doesn't work because you are spending first and then saving later. And you're spending money that you do not have. So what we have to do is find real money to spend for the study if that is your intention. You can't depend on fictional savings that you don't have in hand. Members, this is Enron accounting. We've got to get away from that. We've got to be real to Minnesotans, and this is a no amendment and a no on the bill.
Discussion. Jump from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Downey yield for a question?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Downey, so if this has an immediate enactment date and there may be expenditures, and I heard there was the Senate had a $400,000 for, I'm assuming that's the next biennium where that would go, but I'm not sure on that. So would there be money spent during this fiscal year by the LCC?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hansen, only if they decided to go ahead with the study and felt it was worth it.
The gentleman from Dakota.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Downey, if you yield for another question.
He will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Downey, would that take a meeting? Would the LCC be required to meet, or can they do that with just a letter from the chair, or does there have to be a public meeting for that to occur, and when would that have to occur in order for them to be authorized to participate?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hansen, the amendment says that it would be at the request of the chair and vice chair. I would hardly imagine that they would be able to issue such a request without having a meeting of the commission and also the strong support of the director of the commission.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I think the chair and the vice chair are the Speaker and the Majority Leader, right, or vice versa with the House and the Senate. So if they probably want it to happen, it'll happen. I'm wondering here if this is, as we move towards an early adjournment, the earlier we adjourn, the more dollars there are that are available for things. There may be other expenditures. I'm kind of surprised the Senate is appropriating $400,000. I'm not sure where they have the money for this. But I guess the earlier we adjourn, the more money we have in this fiscal year for things like this. But we don't know how much money this is going to be. The LCC could make that decision and set us on a path this fiscal year that may not have an outcome. We start this path, we get the recommendations in 2013, burning money along the way in this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. So members, I would encourage folks to vote against this amendment.
Discussion. To the A2 amendment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Motion prevails. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third. Oh, the lady from Hennepin? The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 418, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to the bill. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, I originally didn't think this bill was such a bad idea, particularly since it was following over the consolidation across multiple agencies that we did with OET last year. But I really agree. I didn't want to raise it. I didn't think it was that relevant for the amendment. But I do want to agree with many of the points that have been raised, is that we do not have, is that we don't have an adequate source of funding in the bill, and that the idea of taking the idea of taking savings, the anticipated savings, and paying for it, as opposed to putting up some amount of upfront money. If we were just telling administration to look at this, which is kind of what we did for OET, that's one thing. But once we talk about contracting out, even if there's a national contract and it's the most sensible way to do it, which it may be, so I'm not going to argue with doing that, we certainly should put up the upfront money to do it, whatever that is. I am particularly concerned, and I wish I had paid more attention to this earlier, with the picking up of the OET savings. Because part of the things that has governed the consolidation of OET, and when you consider how disruptive that could have been, it has really gone incredibly well in terms of people being able to transition from a subject department to the OET. But we assured them that their savings that their savings would be plunged back into OET, and and the things that they need, the development, so that those savings could be used for strategic reinvestment, committing to the long-term health of the IT infrastructure. And this includes the replacement of legacy systems, investment in shared technology, and questions to address security. And what we're doing as we go from 38 data centers to 1 data center is a really serious effort. And we depend on these savings to do that possibly. And so I really can't support this bill because of its confiscation of the OET savings and putting it into something that is distinct for that. So I think the idea, a study of this is a good idea. I think the author should take the bill back and discuss with his caucus putting an adequate source of funding in it. And I really don't like going off to a conference committee and just letting the Senate tell us how much we could put in. So I urge a no vote on this bill, somewhat reluctantly, because I think it's basically a good idea, but it would be a much better idea if we had a way of paying for it that didn't disrupt what we've done in the past, which is supposed to be a model for what we're supposed to do for this.
Discussion to the bill as amended. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I won't deny that we've got to figure out the exact funding mechanism in conference. I just want people to think a little bit about what we have done the last few years. You know, we sank $80 million. I want you to just think about that number, $80 million into a new accounting system, a new IT system. And for us to think that we wouldn't get any kind of return on that, any kind of savings from that, any kind of efficiency, any ability to improve those functions and take costs out and redeploy those for the programs that we actually all care about. I mean, I just can't imagine an organization making that kind of investment and expecting zero return out of it. And so here we sit with 72 attached agencies and boards all doing these accounting functions, all doing their purchasing off the exact same screens, the exact same vendors, the exact same products, and you're telling me we got to leave all of those people spread all over the state doing those exact same things when we could very easily pull them together. And I'm telling you, members, every single private sector organization started doing this stuff back in the 1980s. We are 20 to 30 years behind on this stuff. This is not rocket science. This is not magic. These are well-known tools. These are established management techniques. The technology is there. The business processes are there. We just have to have the will to do it. And for us to sit here and say, well, we can't do this because we can't somehow find $200,000 or $400,000 out of the billions that we've already appropriated and the millions that we're spending in these agencies is just ludicrous. So, members, this is just plain old good business. I can't imagine we'd be balking on this at all. This is just good, solid management and good, solid fiscal responsibility for the taxpayers.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Representative Downey, there are ways you could have funded it. Besides doing an upfront appropriation, you could have put a surcharge on every other appropriation for every other function on all of the departments. But the money should have been put up front. And of course, as I said, I'm most concerned about going back on a promise that we made just last year for the first consolidation that we were doing. And I don't think that sets a very good scheme for the rest of the agencies, who really, you will get this kind of thing done much more with cooperation rather than confrontation. And to end up with the confrontation with the first agency that we did it for is a real mistake. So I think it's worth putting the money up front. There are various ways you could have put the money up front if somebody wouldn't spring for that proportion of the budget. And until we see that, I think we should vote no on the bill.
Discussion to the bill as amended. The clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. The clerk will close the roll. There being 75 ayes and 56 nays, House File number 418 as amended is passed and its title agreed to. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, Holberg for the Committee on Ways and Means calls up for immediate consideration House File 2967. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2967 on the fiscal calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to state government.
The lady from Dakota, Chair Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And this is the forecast bill that provides for changes in spending as a result of the February forecast, changes in pupil units, etc. In addition to that, there are two provisions that we added in committee. One was a request by Representative Clark to provide funding for the county veteran service organizations, and then a large part of this bill deals with the state fire safety account. Representative Cornish had a bill in committee that asked that the surplus of $4.5 million in that account be appropriated for grants for firefighters across the state for various training programs. For those of you that have been in the legislature for a while, you're aware that a number of years ago we placed a tax, a fee, or whatever you want to call it, Representative Kahn, on homeowners insurance policies and commercial insurance policies, and the way the program was set up was that the money was to fund the state fire marshal's office and provide training grants for our fire service officers in the area of public safety. Unfortunately, over the years with budget situations, time and time again, we have raided that fund and transferred money to the general fund. As a result, over the years, less than the half of the money raised under this tax has actually gone for the purpose in which it was intended. And so as I talked to the advocates for this program, I said, well, this game has to end. I am tired of our local firefighters coming to our office in their matching red polo shirts on lobby day, begging for their money that was rightfully supposed to be theirs. So in working through the process, what we have agreed, and there should be a letter at your desk showing support across the various organizations, we have a reduction of the tax rate beginning in the next biennium. We allow the surplus funds that are currently held to be the $4.5 million to go to the grant program. Any additional surplus funds between now and the end of the biennium to be divided at a percentage decided by the people in the fire safety area, in which 45% of the funds would go to the state fire marshal's office, 55% of the funds would go to the training grant program, and there currently are general fund transfers in the next biennium. We would end that, and so there would be no general fund transfer in the out biennium. And then for those of you that are aware of this little piece of legislation, it's current law. In law, we have the shift payback for K-12, and then I think the airport fund is next, and the fire service fund was listed as eventually getting paid off as monies can't come in. We also delete that provision of current law. We just let bygones be bygones, but moving forward, set up the program so that this money would automatically go to these programs, and hopefully when the firefighters came to visit us in their matching red polo shirts, they'd be happy with what we were doing at the legislature, and we wouldn't have to face their concerns about us continually taking their money for other purposes. With that, members, I do have an author's amendment, which I'd like to move at this time. At the end of the committee hearing, we had heard the Cornish bill separately, and the motion in committee was to amend the entire Cornish bill onto the forecast bill. For some reason, section 6, or what would be lines 1.4 through 1.7 of the amendment, were not included in the engrossment. And then there's a technical change on line 2 of the amendment. The reduction in the tax rate would not occur until July 1, 2013, which is the first date of the next biennium. And I would appreciate, I'd like to move the amendment and would appreciate your support.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Holberg and others moving to amend House File 2967. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A10.
The lady from Dakota, Chair Holberg, to the 810 amendment.
And members, I did explain the amendment and would be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions to the 810 amendment? The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like a roll call.
Roll call having been requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion. The lady from Dakota. The clerk will take the roll on the A10 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the 810 amendment is adopted. Seeing no amendments at the desk.
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment, an oral amendment.
Please state your oral. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen, please state your oral amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's on page 12, line 2.16. I'd like to strike 200,000 and insert 400,000.
The clerk will report the oral amendment.
And I'd like a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call having been requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The clerk will report the oral amendment.
Thiessen moving to amend House File 2967 as follows. On page 12, line 16, delete $200,000 and insert $400,000.
Discussion. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, that we have a lot of folks returning from overseas. We've heard all kinds of issues with the challenges that they're facing, and I think that this is an appropriate amendment to make sure that our County Veteran Services officers have the resources they need to provide the services. And did I ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, you did. Discussion. The gentleman, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I rise in support of this amendment. And as you may know, Representative Holberg, I worked with Representative Clark on some language for this particular amendment into this bill, County Veteran Service Officers. And you may recall I carried a bill that had quite a bit more money in it for County Veteran Service Officers, and it's unfortunate we couldn't get that advanced. But at least let's try and get some money that would be substantive here. for the County Veteran Service officers. This is a big issue. I know Representative Clark talked to you about it. Representative Holberg, I guess she's not here today to speak on this, but she's had some personal experiences, as have I, with these issues. And let's put our at least try and put our best foot forward on this. 200,000. I don't think that's going to get us where we really want to go. It's quite a bit more than that. We need $1 million or more. But let's try and double this anyway.
Discussion to the oral amendment, the lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I'm sorry that Representative Clark's not here, and this kind of falls into the no good deed goes unpunished. Representative Thiessen, I pretty much cleared out the bottom of the barrel to accommodate this for Representative Clark. There's not a lot of money on the bottom line. I did this for her. I wish that you would not raise this oral amendment. I can stand under a 4.05 that it's increased spending in the bill as well, but I worked in good faith with Representative Clark. If I can find more money when we're in conference in the meantime, I certainly will. But this was something that I worked hard. I've got dozens of people coming at me looking for money for their various projects. There's a whole slew of them on my side of the aisle that could shake your heads if I've told them no to fund their things. I viewed this as a priority, and to then now put us in this position of trying to double the money when I don't have it, and having have to make a point of order under 4.05. Representative Thiessen, I wish you'd reconsider your oral amendment.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and that's a great speech, Representative Holberg. The bottom line is, you know that we just got a substantial amount of money back as a result of the 1% cap that Governor Dayton negotiated in the HMOs. I know that you all want to spend it on making huge huge tax decreases for corporations, but that money is sitting on the bottom line, Representative Holberg, so don't give me that. The bottom line is we can afford this amendment. I don't know where your bottom line is coming from, but more importantly, what you're doing is not serious, and you know it. I'm surprised that it's coming from you, because you're putting it in a bill that you know that the governor has strong objections to, which is raiding the reserves, setting us in a situation where we have huge problems. You've left us with a $1 billion deficit for sure next year, plus having to repay the schools another several $1 billion. You didn't solve anything last year, Representative Holberg or the Republicans. The fact of the matter is, you left us in a situation.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
I get cut off.
The gentleman from Washington, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise under point of order Rule 4.05, amendments limits. Amendment of a bill that has been received in a second reading that is being considered must be in balance. This would put the bill out of balance, as Representative Thiessen knows, as Representative Holberg has admonished him, which he also knows. This amendment would put the bill out of balance, and therefore it is out of order under Rule 4.05 of rules.
Advice to the Speaker, the gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All we're asking is that we add $200,000 more on the bottom line when there is at least $25 million, even after we wrapped up Abeler's bill early today, when there's at least $25 million left from the money coming back from the 1% cap on the health plans. I know that the priority on that side of the aisle is to make sure that we give that away to corporations, because your theory is that if the only thing we can do is give money away to corporations, get out of their way, our economy is suddenly miraculously going to be cured. It hasn't worked for a decade. It's what got us into this recession, but you continue to believe that, and that's all fine and good. The bottom line is there is $200,000 in our state budget as we move toward the end of the line, that is on the bottom line, Representative Holberg, that we could put to veterans. You don't have to rise on a point of order. You don't have to agree with this. The rules are there to be enforced. And so I urge the Speaker as advice, and if the Speaker rules upholding Representative Dean's point of order, and we do go to an appeal, I would urge the body to say, of that, several tens of millions of dollars that is still out there, can't we find $200,000 more to put to veterans? But even more importantly, the frustration I guess I have with this and frustration with this point of order is the fact that these items are being put in a bill that the governor has expressed and clearly expressed that he doesn't want to raid the reserve. And that's what you're doing in this bill. You've left us with this huge budget deficit. Even though you claimed you somehow solved something, you've left us with the same deficit we started in 2011 with. I mean, that's the bottom line. And yet you still want to take down that reserve, which makes absolutely no sense. And so you're just not being serious about this. If we really want to do these things, if you really want to solve your red polo shirt problem of the firefighters coming over here, Representative Holberg, you would put it in Representative Cornish's bill, which is on the calendar of the day, and on the list of bills you said we were going to hear today. It solved your fire safety account problem, just taking up Cornish's bill. But you want to play games. You want to do these things to try to leverage things. That's what people hate about our politics right now. So I would urge the Speaker to find that the point of order is not well taken, and let's just move on with this amendment.
Advice, the gentleman from Dakota. Representative
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice.
State your advice, please.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, the highest, when it comes to these decisions, the highest point that we have is the custom and usage in this body. The custom and usage in this body, and I say this with all sincerity, is a year ago we passed the most out-of-balance state budget that we ever have in the history of the state. In 150-plus years, we passed the most out-of-balance state budget, not just for this biennium, but for bienniums to follow. We're billions of dollars, Mr. Speaker, out of balance. The rule that Representative Dean cited, what Representative Thiessen's amendment would allow for, is less than 1/1000th of the out-of-balance nature as to what was passed by the Republican caucus last year. So, Mr. Speaker, all I'd ask you to do is rely on the custom and usage of this body that was set last year. We now allow for this. We allow for it not just to the tune of what Representative Thiessen has talked about, but literally 1,000 times greater. So I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that you find that the Representative Dean's point of order is not well taken.
Advice, the gentleman from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure which comments from Representative Thiessen you're taking under advisement, so I feel the need to refute many of the points he brought forward. Obviously, very easily, when you look at the 4.05 amendment, it says an amendment is out of order that would increase spending. And in the advice given to you by Representative Thiessen, he made the case for the amendment because it increased spending. Now, beyond that, Mr. Speaker, there was some rhetoric coming from Governor Thiessen, or Representative Thiessen, on the item at hand. Keep in mind that when we took over this chamber, there was a $6 billion deficit that the Democrats had left us. And it is correct, we have reduced that down to now a projected deficit that is lower than Governor Dayton's own budget last year had, Mr. Speaker. A smaller deficit than Governor Dayton included in his budget for the out years. So whether that is a fact that you are considering under advice, Mr. Speaker, clearly Minnesota is on the right track. We're moving in the right direction. I'm not sure if it's relevant to whether you want to take the point of order as well taken or not, but again, within 4.05, as the author of the amendment has admitted, it does increase spending, and you have no choice but to rule the Dean point of order well taken.
Advice. The gentleman from Washington, Leader Dean.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, I honestly don't know this. Is it appropriate to ask members to yield questions under advice to the Speaker on a ruling?
To Leader Dean, it is appropriate. Leader Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Thiessen. Representative Thiessen, you have stated, and this is under advice, and I apologize for asking questions and for maybe going a little bit outside the bounds, but I think that your oral amendment kind of goes outside the bounds to argue the merits of the bill, and that's fine. We can do that. We can argue last year and 2 years ago and 5 years ago about appropriations and priorities and so forth. But you actually said something that was kind of interesting. You said that Governor Dayton was going to veto this bill and that therefore we shouldn't be taking action or funding these areas within that. And I'm wondering, I'm looking through this, and I'm not as familiar with this bill as maybe I should have been in doing research, but I'm seeing a lot of really good things funded within this bill, and a lot of very good efforts that were put forward bipartisanly. Representative Holberg working with Representative Clark. I'm seeing a lot of grants. I'm seeing a lot of things that we really need in moving forward. I'm wondering if we need to do work on this bill in order to get it to the point where the legislature can agree to something that the governor can sign. Holy cow, we should be doing this work right now, and I'm seeing nothing but good here. Can you point out what in this bill is so objectionable that would make a governor want to veto this? Because I'm not seeing it. Maybe like I say, maybe I'm just not as familiar with it as you might be, or you've had a discussion with the governor that I don't know about. And that's a little bit off topic, and I apologize for that, but I think the oral amendment was just maybe a tiny bit off topic as well, but maybe Representative Thiessen can help me out a little bit with that.
Will the gentleman from Hennepin yield?
I'll offer some more advice, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman will not yield.
I don't think I can be asked
Advice
to yield.
to the Speaker.
Thank you. Well, I'm talking about and first of all, I did not say the governor I never used the word veto. I said he's already expressed objections to rating the reserve, which you're doing in this bill, and he's done that repeatedly and publicly. So I would point to Article 2 on page 8, Representative Dean, if you want to actually get this, what I'm talking about. The point of the matter is, I don't disagree with a lot of the things that you're talking about, Representative Dean, that there's good things in this bill. That's why I don't think you should be playing games with it. Let's just send these good things, like Representative Cornish's bill on the fire safety account. It's sitting on the general register. It's on the calendar, and it was actually on the list of bills that you gave us that we were going to take up today until you decided not to take it up today. So why would you just not send that good piece of legislation standalone on the fire safety account and send that to the governor for his signature? That seems like the way we ought to be doing business here in the state of Minnesota. So that is the point that I'm making. You are kind of playing games by lumping all this stuff together because you think you can leverage something. Let's not play those games anymore, Representative Holberg.
Mr. Speaker.
Let's take Representative Cornish's bill up.
Parliamentary inquiry.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Dakota, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
What is the question before the body?
Advice to the Speaker on the point of order. The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, it was just as you know, and I think everybody in the body knows, it was in response to Representative Dean, who you could have risen to the same parliamentary inquiry with Representative Wardlow. So you got me there. Good one. So the bottom line here is that to your point of to the point of order, I think we should just we rule the point of order not well taken. We have money on the bottom line, if that is the argument, and we can go ahead and have this vote. Proceed forward.
Advice. Lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we're far afield of advice here, but just for the record, Representative Thiessen, the Senate companion to Representative Cornish's bill is still sitting in committee in the Senate. So he has no Senate companion. So it's a way to get this stuff moving. This bill is going to conference. We will work with the administration. And again, I am asking you to remove your oral amendment. I wish Representative Clark was here. I feel like we worked in good faith. Representative Purcell worked on language. Representative Kriesel worked on language. I only have the money on the sheet that we have, the 1.622. You know how this works. I think this is a really unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if we are negotiating, I will withdraw the amendment if you withdraw Section 3 of Article 2. If you'll withdraw that language, which, obviously, if we truly are working in good faith toward a bill that can get signed, then I take you at your word at that, but that's what you ought to do. So if Representative Holberg is willing to do that, and maybe it's not just Section 3, maybe we should just take out all of Article 2. If you're willing to do that, run that as a separate bill, then maybe we can have a deal if you're willing to remove Article 2.
Advice? Gentleman from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, as a freshman and only born in the 60s, I don't have as much familiarity with 150 years of budgets. I am familiar with, during my lifetime, and I do agree that this past budget was a stark change from business as usual and as deficits as usual. And being a physicist, math and logic and reason are part of the tools I use. And looking at this, I would advise that it does qualify as an increase, and therefore I ask you to take the point of order positively.
Advice. To the point of order, the Dean point of order, having listened to advice from many members, the Speaker will rule that the point of order is well taken. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading, as amended.
Third reading, House File 2967, as amended.
Third reading, as amended. Discussion to the bill. The lady from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I was one of 3 Democrats, actually, who voted for the first bill that Representative Garofalo had to take money from the reserves to pay back some of the school debt. And even though I didn't think that was a very good source of revenue, I wanted to vote for it to keep the issue alive. I also voted for the DFL plan that had a much better funding source that the Republicans didn't agree with. And I'm just trying to be on the side of the kids and pay back the schools. But I have to say, Representative Garofalo and Representative Holberg, you've now pushed me a little too far, and we've come up with a proposal to pay back the school funding shift using the reserves that even I cannot vote for to keep the issue alive, because I'm really wondering now if this isn't about games playing rather than trying to pay back the schools. This bill has the same school funding mechanism as the earlier bill. It does add in metered payments to try to allay the worries about the Department of Budget and MMB that in case we run into cash flow problems. But there's this added provision that goes over the line, and that is changing the goal from 90-10 to 95-5 without any payment of it at all. We found out in Ways and Means that this provision would cost $375 million. It increases how much we owe our schools by that much, which would be a realistic thing to do if we were also going to add in payment of $375 million. But we're not, and so I can't support this bill. And then, like Representative Thiessen, I think that it's very unfortunate that we have 2 good provisions, one for the firefighters and one for the veterans, that are log-rolled into this bad school debt payment provision. So I think we all pretty much, at least on this side of the aisle, should be voting no on this bill. And it's with a heavy heart that I have to recommend this, because I'm trying very hard to not be so partisan this year when it comes to things I really care about, like the Capitol, like paying back the schools. but this goes too far, so please join me in voting no.
Discussion to the bill as amended. The clerk will take the clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. The clerk will close the roll. There being 74 ayes and 56 nays, House File number 2967 as amended is passed and its title agreed to. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1754. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1754, number 33 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to lawful gambling.
The gentleman from Washington, Representative Dettmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We are a patriotic nation. And I think probably the next four items that I mentioned, I think we all can probably say that we've all attended these activities in our communities, and many of us might even have spoken at these activities. One is the 4th of July activities. I think most of us have participated in that activity in our communities, or probably most of us have been in parades during the 4th of July. Memorial Day events. I know I've spoken at many Memorial Day events, and probably you have too. Veterans Day events. We have participated in those as elected officials, and also military funerals. Well, most Americans have attended these important events. Like myself, as a state legislature, I've been asked to be guest speakers at many of these events. Members, this bill increases the amount that an organization that does charitable gambling to give to these honor guards, color guards, and military marching units from $35 up to $50. This language is permissive. It's not a mandate. Just allows the charitable gambling organizations to provide this increase in funding if they have the funds available. We have the support of the Charitable Gambling Board, and they're neutral on the bill. This allows the veteran organizations to spend more on their charitable gaming proceeds to these types of services for veterans and their families. And I ask for a green vote. Thank you.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1754.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. The gentleman from Itasca, Representative Ansels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a good bill, but Representative Dettmer just want to make one clarification. There is no such thing in state statute anymore, a reference to charitable gambling organizations. It's now called lawful gambling. Good bill, vote yes.
Discussion to Senate File 1754. Discussion. Clerk will take the roll.
Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 yeas and 0 nays, the bill is passed and title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar of the day is House File 2795. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2795, number 34 on the calendar for today, an act relating to horse racing.
We'll call on the author of the bill, the member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, this is a bill, in the title is horse racing, and what's dealing with is the amount of drugs that veterinarians are able to prescribe for horses at Canterbury and Running Aces. What we're doing is changing the prescribed amounts in statute and giving that authority to the veterinarians themselves, to the horse racing folks. The idea is that they will be able to use less of the drugs. It's better for the horses. It's better for horse racing. And members, I would appreciate your support and it would stand for any questions.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2795.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 yeas and 0 nays, the bill is passed and the title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar of the day is House File 1975. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1975, number 37 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to state government.
We'll call on the author. It was on the top. How do you want to handle that? Do it right now? That's not a bill. Yeah. Take Taz first. We'll call on the author of the bill, the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to continue the bill.
Representative Drazkowski wants to continue the bill.
Number 32. Did we vote on it? No, we didn't vote on it.
The next. All in favor of continuing the bill signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The bill is continued. The next calendar on the day is House File 2690. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2690, number 32 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to taxation.
We'll call on the author of the bill, the member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2690, is basically a cleanup bill of some TIF statutes. We have incorporated a runback bill, House File 2538 in the bill. We also have some minor provisions regarding the Public Finance Authority. And Mr. Speaker, I have an author's amendment.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Dave is moving to amend House File 2690, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A8.
Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is simply a technical correction to the bill. I'd appreciate your support.
Discussion to the amendment. Seeing no discussion to the amendment, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Mahoney and others moving to amend House File 2690, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A10.
Call on the member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A10 amendment is the Jobs Now tax credit. It's a $3,000 credit to an employer for hiring an unemployed person, a recent graduate, high school or college, or a veteran back from service to the country. Or right now, members, there are over 160,000 unemployed people in the state of Minnesota. And some of the worst are the most affected, not the worst, but the most affected are our recent graduates and our veterans and long-term unemployed. What this bill does is lays out a credit for our businesses that hire one of these three groups with a minimum wage of $25,000 and limits the employer to just $50,000 worth of credits. So they could hire 15 or 16 employees. And in the second year, it's a $1,500 credit if you don't hire them this year, but you hire them next year, after January or December 31st of 2012. There are other states that are doing this. I have a list of economists that believe that this is a good idea and does help the economy. The other states that are doing this are Florida, Illinois, Maryland, California. Members, this is a good bill. I'll stand for questions.
Discussion to the amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Mahoney.
I'd ask for a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise under 4.05. This amendment obviously raises and spends additional money and would be in violation of that rule.
Representative Holberg raises a point of order under 4.05. Advice.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Advice, but a point of parliamentary inquiry first.
State your inquiry.
Under Rule 4.05 are tax reductions, so actually reducing taxes on the people of Minnesota, a spending increase for purpose of Rule 4.05.
Reducing taxes? No.
Representative Thiessen, I believe the point of order is being made because this is to your inquiry. Representative Thiessen, to your inquiry, I believe the reason the point of order is being made is because it's viewed as spending.
Mr. Speaker, then advice.
Advice?
Well, the way that the rule is stated is that an amendment to a bill that would increase spending from any fund from which appropriations are made or increase the spending or spending based on the total funds in the bill, so related to appropriations, are barred by this rule. I'm not sure that a tax cut, which is what is being proposed here, actually reducing taxes on employers in Minnesota, is an appropriation that would fall within Rule 4.05. And on that basis, I would urge the Speaker to rule this point of order, which is trying to rule a reduction in taxes as out of order, as new spending, not well taken.
Advice? Member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice. The advice I would give is that I have paid for this with foreign operating corporation cuts. These are the cuts to the foreign operating corporations not located in the state of Minnesota. They have no business. They take a tax credit out of Minnesota. They don't pay anything here. They don't have employees here. So, Mr. Speaker, I do that. And then if you're going to come back and say that the tax bill, this money is spent in the tax bill, that bill was passed 2 weeks ago. And the conference committee has met, so they haven't come up with any solutions to this. You don't know. This is another option for that money to be spent, to spend it on unemployed people, veterans, and recent graduates, rather than tax cuts to corporations. Mr. Speaker, I hope you'll find not against this point of order.
Representative Marquardt, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker. So I'm sorry I was standing, you didn't catch me, so sorry about that, Mr. Speaker. Advice, members, the Mahoney Amendment cuts taxes to businesses. And Rule 4.05 is, would it increase the spending or spending base? So if you look back at the tax bill that was passed off this House floor a few weeks ago, those business property tax reductions, if you take this, if you see this well taken, would be considered a $1.6 billion spending increase then, if in fact you rule with Representative Holberg. So, Mr. Speaker, this does not add to the spending base. This is a business tax cut. And I would hope that you'd find the point of order not well taken.
Members, having reviewed Rule 4.05, reviewing the amendment and receiving the advice from Representative Marquardt, Representative Thiessen, and Representative Mahoney, I rule that the Holberg point of order is well taken.
Appeal, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
I'd like to appeal your ruling.
Is it appeal a ruling? Are there?
Yeah. And I'd like to ask for a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion on the motion to appeal the ruling.
Advice, Mr. Speaker, to the body.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Well, members, I guess with this ruling, if you vote for this ruling, you are acknowledging that you just spent $1.6 billion more out of your tax bill, as Representative Marquardt just stated, that you've increased state spending by $1.6 billion with the tax bill you passed off the floor. But, the fact of the matter is there's maybe as little as 6 days left in this legislative session. The bill that you're passing really does not do too much to help us finish this session on a productive note. We've worked hard as we move through this session to make sure that there are some jobs bills, some really smart, targeted bills that would put people back to work on our side of the aisle. We propose them in a serious manner. There are good ideas that have worked in other states. And unfortunately, we've gotten nothing in response. We did get a hearing in Representative Gunther's committee, and that was a nice start, but they died there. We've wanted to work in a cooperative way this session to move forward on a jobs agenda, the thing that everybody in this body said that they wanted to focus on this year. And as we come to the end of this session, what are we left with? We're left, maybe we get a bonding bill, and we'll still have to kind of work on making sure we get a bonding bill that actually puts Minnesotans back to work. But aside from that, what have we done? You haven't done anything to help the employees, the workers, the people that need to increase their job skills, the people that need to get back to work. You've done nothing. What you've done on the theory of creating jobs is give away money to corporations. That you're certainly really good at. But remember that there's people that actually need to work, and those are the folks that we should be focusing on in our job creation discussion. You've been unwilling to work in a bipartisan way to do that. We offered you another chance with Representative Mahoney's amendment today. Again, you reject it. And what you are also rejecting is actually tax reductions for small businesses, something you claim to be all for. I don't understand why you would uphold the ruling of this speaker. It actually doesn't fit with Rule 4.05 because there is no appropriation here. So if you ever propose tax cuts in the future, I guess that is what the rule is going to be. But beyond that, let's at least do one thing to show the people of Minnesota that we're willing to work on a bipartisan basis on a smart idea that will actually and this is the other important thing, help put veterans returning from overseas, help them get back to work. I mean, how can you be against that? This is what we should be doing. You should vote to overturn the ruling of the Speaker. It was an incorrect ruling, with all respect to the Speaker. And you can also override his ruling on the ground that this is something we should be doing for the veterans and for the people of Minnesota. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask members to vote red.
The member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I urge a no vote. Very simply, this is not how employers do it. I mean, I think it shows the naivete of our friends on the other side of the aisle. Businesses don't think in terms of hiring certain classes of people, certain categories of people. And frankly, remember back just 2 years ago, they were laying off people in droves. Painful process of having to lay off folks that they'd worked with, folks that they knew personally. And they're very gradually and cautiously bringing back those employers. It's not something you think of, is to say, well, here's some money out there. That's just backwards. Here's some money out there. Here's somebody over here. I'm going to put this together and hire more people. This isn't how our employers, operate. It isn't smart. And I'll tell you something else. And you look at the readings and the economic studies, it doesn't even work. I mean, like I say, frankly, these employers, if they were going to hire, they're going to hire. And so here they are. You're going to reward them with a credit for doing what they were going to do anyway. I mean, this is really a backwards idea. And frankly, giving up the FOC credit, those are big employers in Minnesota. So I think your trade-off is really all wrong, and I urge you to no vote.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, members, here we go again.
I would just suggest and advise that we support the correct ruling of the Speaker. Our good minority leader said that we are unwilling to work in a bipartisan way. Members, this bill in the scheme of things isn't really a big deal. Why am I carrying this? Because the governor wants me to carry this. That's why. And the Public Financing Authority wants me to carry this. Sometimes people know not of what they speak. And when that happened when I was growing up as a child, my mother, God rest her soul, would say Gregory, and when she'd say Gregory, I knew something was coming that I wasn't going to like much. She said, "You're full of prunes." And with what the minority leader just said, that thought went through my mind, but I would not say that on this House floor because that would be inappropriate. To say that we're not working on a bipartisan member, I just got a letter from Commissioner Franz, all these pages, this is one letter, on all the things that he likes about the tax relief and job creation bill. How can anyone stand on this House floor and say we are not working in a bipartisan manner? If I had said that, my mother would have said, God rest her soul, Gregory, you are full of prunes. Because that is exactly the case. Members, if you're going to play games with this bill, I'm carrying for the governor and the Public Finance Authority. If there's going to be more amendments, I'll just pull the bill, and then I'll have the governor talk to the good minority leader on why he did such a thing. So members, please uphold the ruling of the Speaker. Let's get this bill out for the governor, and let's do it for America.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suspect we're going to be doing this for the prunes because, you know, Representative Runbeck, I guess we are an outlier if we're going to do this. You must not have been here listening when I mentioned the other states that did this. California has 25,000 people that went to work with their program. Maryland had 4,000. Florida had, what has Florida got here? No, then I'd have to do math, and you know, my mother talked about prunes whenever she talked about math with me. Illinois. And there are, I'd like to know the research groups that you are citing saying that this doesn't work. Because I can go to Cornell, I can go to the Kauffman Institute, I can go to a number of different places that do recommend this. And by the way, the Kauffman is not altogether that liberal of a group of people. So, members, I hope that you will overturn the ruling of the Speaker, because this is a program that actually works. And I am not full of prunes, as my mother used to say to me every once in a while. Well, not today. I was then, but I'm not today. This is a way to put 14,000 people to work. Get them a job. Best program you can do for anyone, best government job you can do for anyone is to lay out a program where they can get a job. Not give them a job, not pay for a job, not make work, but let a private sector employer hire someone and keep them on for, I think this bill calls for a year, at a $25,000 minimum wage. Members, this is a good amendment. And Representative Davids should not be threatening to remove bills that we as a body decide should be heard and put in front of the governor. Because if the will of the body is to move this forward, far be it from one member of this body to hold up something. That would be something wrong. So, members, I hope you will vote red on this particular appeal.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, before we vote on this appealing the ruling, could you let the body know what a red vote would mean, what a green vote would mean? We have a lot of people going in and out, conference committees and things like that. I think it would help the body. Thank you.
Certainly. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Discussion. Member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment only gives a credit if a job is created. Unlike the wishful thinking of the tax bill that passed here a couple weeks ago that spends ultimately $1.6 billion in the biennium without any promise, any accountability that one new job will be created. This amendment, I think $35 million, that $35 million does not get paid unless 14,000 jobs are created. No job created, not a dime spent. You've got to create a job to get the credit. Members, this is a quick, efficient, effective way to get people back to work. And right now, last month, we lost 200 jobs. Things have been moving in the right direction. We lost 200 jobs. We've gained back about half of those jobs that were lost during the Great Recession, but there's still 168,000 people in this state looking for work. This will start getting those people back to work in a very quick and efficient way. Please support. Please go against the Speaker's ruling.
Discussion. Again, members, a yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 yeas and 59 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. Seeing no other amendments, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2690, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to third reading. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 109 yeas and 20 nays, the bill is passed and the title agreed to. Calling the member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I move that the calendar for the day be continued.
All in favor of the calendar being continued signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The calendar is continued. The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, it's my intention to place House File 1284 Beard, Senate File 230 Norton, Senate File 1808 Lanning, House File 2685 Beard, House File 2860 Cornish, Senate File 1597 Dettmer, and House File 1752 housed on the fiscal calendar for Wednesday, April 25th, 2012.
If no objections, messages from the Senate.
Messages from the Senate. This is the Woodard motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file. Herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 1607, an act relating to state capital. Woodard moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 1607 and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members to meet with the like committee appointed by the Senate.
The member from Scott, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is my motion. The Senate inadvertently used their language instead of our language, which is much better, so we're going to conference committee.
The motion is to refuse to concur. Discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The motion is adopted. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee in House File 1607. Woodard, McDonald, and Lawful.
Okay. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions will prevail.
House Concurrent Resolution Number 11, a Senate concurrent resolution relating to the delivery of bills to the Governor after final adjournment. Dean moves that the Senate concurrent resolution number 11 be now adopted.
Member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, members, this allows us to send bills to the governor after adjournment. It's a housekeeping resolution that we do that allows for that. Appreciate your support.
Discussion on the motion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Take both of these.
Opposed? Motion carried.
That's it.
Announcements. Member from Stearns, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is going to be kind of a repeat from announcements yesterday evening. But I just wanted to first thank Representative Drazkowski, Representative Hoppe, and also Mike Charbonneau as they contributed to the Johnny bread that we all had today. The Johnny bread is a century-old recipe that comes from the monks of St. John's. The butter that we had today is done by the nuns of the St. Benedict Monastery, the largest Benedictine monastic community in the United States, and the meat came from the St. Joe Meat Market. Because we normally do the Johnny Bread Day on the longest of session days, and today is not the longest of session days, we have leftovers. So tomorrow we will also have Johnny Bread Day with Benny butter, St. Joe meat. So we'll repeat today. And I also want to make sure that other St. John's and St. Ben's alums are recognized who work in the House of Representatives. That would be Greg Crow, Kevin Poindexter, Rebecca Peichel, Tom Freeman, and as I mentioned, Mike Charbonneau. So thank you for allowing me to highlight District 14B and to show a little bit of the pride of St. John's and St. Ben's alum. We are proud of where we come from. Thank you.
Announcements. Member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to add to that because he wouldn't say about it himself. Representative Haas, he did the lion's share of work on this. He brought down 65 loaves of bread, including all the meat. His car must smell great right now. But thank you very much to Representative Haas. I also want to thank our staff here at the House that did such a great job in helping get everything set up. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes with little things that guys like me don't think of, plastic knives and little plates, and thank you. And to the rest of you, thank you for bringing your appetites.
Member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, as kind of an unofficially self-announced representative of the Tommy caucus here in the House of Representatives, I want to thank all of the Johnnies in the House for bringing the Johnny bread and the meats from St. Joe and the honey butter. Nice job.
Member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Wednesday, April 25th, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns at 10 a.m. until 10 a.m. Wednesday, April 25th, 2012. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. GOP members will caucus immediately after session, or actually about 4 p.m. in room 10. With that, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, April 25th, 2012.